The Pirate Queen, Tale of the Gulf Coast, by Sylvester Sko Fourroux. Part 1. The Settlement Girl. Chapter 1. The Bayou. The morning mist rose from Boyuo La Batre like the breath of some ancient creature, curling through the cypress trees and hanging low over the dark water. Isabella Rousseau stood at the edge of the wooden dock, her bare feet already damp from the dew-soaked planks, watching as her father and two brothers prepared the small fishing boat for another day on the Gulf. The year was 1812, and the settlement of Boyuo La Batre was little more than a collection of weathered wooden structures, clinging to the Alabama coastline like barnacles to a ship's hull. 43 families called this place home, most of them French Catholics who had migrated from Mobile or down from the Louisiana territories, seeking their fortunes in the rich fishing grounds and the relative isolation from the conflicts that seemed to plague the larger settlements. "Isabella," her mother's voice cut through the humid air, "these chickens won't feed themselves, child. Come away from that water." Isabella turned reluctantly, her blue eyes lingering on the boat where her father, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, was checking the crab traps with her brothers, Michel and Antoine. At 15, Isabella was caught between two worlds, the domestic sphere her mother inhabited, full of cooking pots and mending baskets and the endless, grinding work of keeping a household running, and the world of the water that called to her like a siren's song. "Yes, Mama," she said, but her voice carried no enthusiasm. Marie Rousseau stood in the doorway of their small house, her hands on her hips, her dark hair already escaping from the bun she'd pinned it into before dawn. She was only 34, but the hard life of the settlement had aged her, carving lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of worry and work in equal measure. "Don't you—" "Yes, Mama me," in that tone, Marie said, though there was no real anger in her voice. "Your father and brothers will be gone all day. There's washing to do, and I need you to help me with the preserves. Those figs won't put themselves up." Isabella walked back toward the house, casting one last glance over her shoulder at the boat. Her father stood at the stern, his weathered face set in its usual expression of grim determination. He was a hard man, Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, made harder by the years of scratching out a living from the Gulf. He rarely smiled, rarely spoke except to give orders or criticize, and he had never, not once in Isabella's memory, looked at her with anything approaching warmth. She didn't understand why. Her brothers, Michel at 17 and Antoine at 16, could do no wrong in their father's eyes. They were praised for their strength, their skill with the nets and traps, their ability to read the water and the weather. But Isabella, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how perfectly she completed her tasks, received nothing but cold indifference at best and harsh criticism at worst. "Girls got no business mooning over the water like that," she'd heard her father say to her mother one night, his voice carrying through the thin walls of their house. "She should be thinking about finding a husband, settling down. What good is a daughter who dreams of things she can't have?" What Isabella didn't know, what no one knew, except Jean-Baptiste himself, was that every time he looked at his daughter, he saw the face of his own father, the man who had beaten him bloody throughout his childhood, who had told him he was worthless, who had driven him from his home in Mobile, with nothing but the clothes on his back. Isabella had inherited her grandfather's blonde hair, his blue eyes, his sharp features. And though Jean-Baptiste knew it was irrational, though he knew his daughter bore no responsibility for the sins of a man she'd never met, he couldn't help the resentment that rose in his chest every time he looked at her. So he gave her hell. He criticized her cooking, her cleaning, her posture, her voice. He found fault where there was none, and magnified small mistakes into major transgressions. And in doing so, he was slowly forging his daughter into something he never intended, something hard and determined, and utterly unwilling to accept the limitations others tried to place upon her. Isabella spent the morning, as she spent most mornings, working alongside her mother in the endless cycle of domestic labor that defined a woman's life in the settlement. She fed the chickens and collected their eggs, hauled water from the well, scrubbed the wooden floors until her knees ached, and helped her mother prepare the figs for preserving, standing over the hot stove in the already sweltering kitchen until sweat ran down her back and her hair stuck to her forehead. But her mind was elsewhere. It was out on the Gulf, where the water stretched to the horizon and beyond, where ships from distant ports sailed past, carrying exotic goods and tales of far-off lands. It was in the books she'd managed to borrow from the settlement's small collection, stories of exploration and adventure that she read by candlelight long after her family had gone to sleep. "You're quiet today," her mother observed, stirring the pot of figs and sugar that bubbled on the stove. "More than usual, I mean." Isabella looked up from the jars she was preparing, meeting her mother's eyes. Marie Rousseau was a kind woman, worn down by life but not broken by it, and she loved her daughter fiercely, even if she didn't always understand her. "I was just thinking," Isabella said carefully, "about Papa and the boys, about the fishing." Marie's expression softened with something like sympathy. "Isabella, chérie, you know that's not—" "Not for girls," Isabella finished, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "I know, Mama. Everyone's made that very clear." "It's not about what's fair or not fair," Marie said gently. "It's about what is. The world is the way it is, and we have to live in it. A woman's place is in the home, I know." Isabella turned back to the jars, her jaw set. "But why, Mama? Why can't I learn to fish, to sail, to navigate?" "I'm stronger than Antoine, and I'm smarter than both my brothers put together. Everyone knows it." "Isabella." Marie's voice was sharp now, alarmed. "You mustn't say such things. If your father heard you—" "Papa doesn't care what I say or think," Isabella said flatly. "He barely acknowledges I exist, except to tell me I'm doing something wrong." Marie was silent for a long moment, and when Isabella looked up, she saw tears in her mother's eyes. "Your father is a complicated man," she said quietly. "He carries burdens you don't understand, but he does care for you, in his way." Isabella wanted to argue, to point out all the evidence to the contrary, but she held her tongue. There was no point in causing her mother more pain. Instead, she focused on the work, letting the familiar rhythm of it soothe her restless spirit. The afternoon brought a brief respite when Isabella was sent to the settlement's small schoolhouse to deliver a basket of food to Monsieur Thibodeau, the elderly teacher who ran the school and who often forgot to eat when he was absorbed in his books. The schoolhouse was a single room with rough-hewn benches and a slate board at the front, and it served the 8 children of the settlement who were young enough to need formal instruction. But Monsieur Thibodeau's school was more than just a place for children. In the evenings, he opened his doors to anyone who wanted to learn, and he had a small but precious library of books that he'd accumulated over his long life. Isabella had been coming to these evening sessions since she was 12, soaking up knowledge like the dry earth soaked up rain. "Ah, Mademoiselle Isabella," Monsieur Thibodeau said when she entered, his lined face breaking into a smile. He was 70 if he was a day, with a shock of white hair and eyes that still sparkled with curiosity and intelligence. "You bring me sustenance for the body. Excellent. And will you stay for sustenance for the mind?" "If I can, monsieur," Isabella said, setting the basket on his desk. "Mama needs me at home, but I might be able to come back after supper." "Good, good." He rummaged in the basket, pulling out a piece of cornbread and biting into it with evident pleasure. "I've acquired a new book. Well, new to me. It's a treatise on navigation by the stars. I thought you might find it interesting." Isabella's heart leaped. "Oh, monsieur, truly?" "Truly," his eyes twinkled. "I know where your interests lie, child, even if others don't approve. There's no harm in learning, Isabella. Knowledge is never wasted, no matter what use you may or may not make of it." "Thank you," Isabella breathed, already imagining the pages, the diagrams, the secrets they would reveal. "Your father still refuses to take you out on the boat?" Monsieur Thibodeau asked gently. Isabella's expression darkened. "He won't even discuss it. Says it's not proper, that I'd be in the way, that I'm needed at home." The old teacher studied her for a moment. You know, Isabella, I've taught many children in my years, and I can say without hesitation that you have one of the finest minds I've ever encountered. You grasp concepts quickly, you think critically, you question and analyze. It's a rare gift. A gift that will be wasted, Isabella said bitterly. What good is a fine mind when all I'm allowed to do is cook and clean and wait for some man to marry me? Perhaps, Monsieur Thibodeau said slowly, the world will change, or perhaps you will change it. Either way, keep learning, child. Keep that mind sharp. You never know when you might need it. Isabella returned home to find her father and brothers back from their day on the water, the boat loaded with crabs and fish that would be taken to the market in Mobile the next day. She helped her mother prepare supper while the men cleaned and sorted their catch, and when they all sat down to eat, she endured her father's criticism of the gumbo she'd helped make. Too much salt, not enough file powder, the okra overcooked in silence. But that night, after the dishes were washed and put away, after her parents had retired to their room and her brothers to the loft they shared, Isabella slipped out of the house and made her way back to Monsieur Thibodeau's schoolhouse. The old teacher was waiting for her, the navigation book open on his desk, a candle burning beside it. And there, in the flickering candlelight, Isabella began to learn the secrets of the sea, how to read the stars and use them to find your way across trackless water, how to interpret the movements of the sun and moon, how to calculate latitude and longitude, how to read the weather in the clouds, and the behavior of the birds. She learned about currents and tides, about the dangers of shoals and reefs, about the different types of vessels and how they were rigged and sailed. She was a voracious student, absorbing everything Monsieur Thibodeau could teach her and then asking for more. The old man, delighted to have such an eager pupil, shared everything he knew not just about navigation, but about the wider world, about history and geography, about the great explorers and the routes they had taken, about the politics of nations and the economics of trade. "Why do you teach me all this?" Isabella asked him one night, several months into her studies. "You know I'll never be able to use it. Women don't become ship's captains." Monsieur Thibodeau looked at her over the rim of his spectacles. "Don't they? I seem to recall reading about Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two women who sailed as pirates in the Caribbean, and Grace O'Malley, the Irish pirate queen, and Qing Shi, who commanded a fleet of hundreds of ships in China." "Those are just stories," Isabella protested. "Are they?" The old man smiled. "History is full of women who refuse to accept the limitations placed upon them, Isabella. They may be rare, but they exist. And who's to say you won't be one of them? Besides," he added, his expression growing more serious, "knowledge is its own reward. Even if you never set foot on a ship, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing you could navigate one if you needed to. That's worth something, isn't it?" Isabella had to admit that it was. Chapter 2. The Storm. The summer of 1813 was brutally hot, even by the standards of the Gulf Coast. The air hung thick and heavy, and the water of the bayou grew warm and sluggish. The fishing was poor, and tempers in the settlement grew short as families worried about making it through the winter. Isabella, now 16, had grown taller and stronger, her body hardening from the constant physical labor. But more than that, her mind had grown sharper, more focused. She continued her studies with Monsieur Thibodeau, and she'd begun to apply what she learned in practical ways, helping her mother with the household accounts, calculating the best times for planting based on the phases of the moon, even treating minor illnesses and injuries with remedies she'd learned from the old teacher's medical texts. The settlement had no doctor, and Monsieur Thibodeau, who had studied medicine in his youth before becoming a teacher, had taken it upon himself to serve as the community's healer. Isabella became his assistant, learning to set broken bones, stitch wounds, prepare poultices and tinctures, and diagnose common ailments. She had a natural aptitude for it, a steady hand and a calm demeanor that put patients at ease. "You'd make a fine physician," Monsieur Thibodeau told her one day, as they treated a child's infected cut. If the world were different. If the world were different, I'd be many things, Isabella replied, carefully cleaning the wound. But it's not, so I won't. Her father's attitude toward her had not improved. If anything, it had grown worse as Isabella matured into a young woman who looked more and more like the grandfather Jean-Baptiste had hated. He found fault with everything she did, criticized her constantly, and made it clear that he considered her a burden rather than a blessing. But Isabella had learned to armor herself against his words. She'd grown hard as the cypress wood that formed the pilings of the settlement's docks, and she no longer let his criticism wound her. Instead, she channeled her hurt and anger into determination. She would prove herself, somehow. She would show them all what she was capable of. The opportunity came in late August, when Michel fell ill with a fever that left him weak and bedridden. The family couldn't afford to lose a day's fishing they were already behind on their debts to the merchant in Mobile who supplied them with nets and traps, and Jean-Baptiste was faced with a choice. Go out with only Antoine, which would mean half the usual catch, or take Isabella. Isabella was in the kitchen when she heard her parents arguing about it. Absolutely not, her father said, his voice hard. I won't have her on my boat. Jean-Baptiste, be reasonable, her mother pleaded. We need the money. You know we do. And Isabella is strong. She can help. She's a girl. She'll be in the way. She's your daughter, and she's willing to work. Why do you hate her so much? There was a long silence, and then her father's voice, lower now, almost anguished. I don't hate her. I can't look at her without seeing him. Your father has been dead for 20 years, Marie said softly. Isabella is not responsible for what he did to you. I know that. Jean-Baptiste's voice rose again. Don't you think I know that? But I can't help how I feel. Then perhaps it's time you tried, Marie said firmly. Take her with you tomorrow. Give her a chance. You might be surprised. Isabella held her breath, waiting for her father's response. When it came, it was grudging, reluctant. But it was yes, fine. But if she slows us down, if she causes any problems, she never sets foot on that boat again. Isabella's heart soared. Finally, she would get her chance. She barely slept that night, too excited and nervous to rest. She rose before dawn and dressed in her oldest, most practical clothes, a pair of Antoine's outgrown trousers that she'd secretly altered to fit her, a loose shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. When she came down to the kitchen, her mother looked at her outfit with alarm. Isabella, you can't wear that. What will people think? I can't work in a dress, Mama, Isabella said practically. And I don't care what people think. Marie sighed, but didn't argue further. She packed a basket of food for the day and handed it to Isabella along with a jug of water. Be careful, she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. And try not to antagonize your father. I'll try, Isabella promised. The boat was a 20-foot cypress skiff with a small sail and oars for when the wind failed. It was old and weathered but well-maintained, and Isabella felt a thrill of excitement as she stepped aboard. Her father and Antoine were already there, preparing the nets and checking the crab traps they'd stacked in the stern. Jean-Baptiste looked at Isabella's outfit with disapproval but said nothing. You'll do what I tell you, when I tell you, he said curtly. No questions, no arguments. Understood? Yes, sir, Isabella said. They pushed off from the dock as the sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and Antoine raised the sail to catch the morning breeze. Isabella watched everything with keen attention, noting how her brother adjusted the rigging, how her father read the water and the wind, how they worked together with the easy coordination of long practice. They sailed out into the Gulf, past the barrier islands, and into the deeper water where the fishing was better. The morning was beautiful, the water calm and glittering in the sunlight, and Isabella felt a sense of freedom and rightness that she'd never experienced on land. This was where she belonged. She knew it with a certainty that went bone deep. Her father set her to work baiting and checking the crab traps, hard physical labor that left her arms aching and her hands raw. But she didn't complain. She worked steadily, efficiently, and when her father grudgingly showed her how to mend a torn net, she learned quickly and did the work well. By midday, they'd filled half the boat with crabs and fish, a good haul by any standard. Jean-Baptiste's mood had improved slightly, and he even offered Isabella a brief nod of approval when she successfully landed a large redfish. "Not bad," he said, which was the closest thing to praise Isabella had ever received from him. They ate their lunch on the boat, rocking gently on the swells, and Isabella felt a contentment she'd never known. Antoine, who had always been kinder to her than their father, grinned at her. "You're a natural," he said. "Better than Michelle, if I'm being honest." "Don't tell him I said that," Isabella smiled back. "Your secret's safe with me." Even her father seemed to relax a little, the hard lines of his face softening as he looked out over the water. For a moment, Isabella dared to hope that things might change, that her father might finally see her as something other than a reminder of painful memories. But the moment was brief. As they prepared to head back to shore, Jean-Baptiste's expression closed off again, and he barked orders at Isabella with his usual harshness. Still, he didn't forbid her from coming out again, and over the following weeks, Isabella became a regular member of the fishing crew. She learned quickly, absorbing everything her father and brothers could teach her about reading the water, finding the best fishing spots, predicting the weather, and handling the boat. She learned the names of every line and sail, how to tie a dozen different knots, how to navigate by the sun and stars, using the techniques Monsieur Thibodeau had taught her. She learned to gut and clean fish with swift efficiency, to repair nets and traps, to read the subtle signs that indicated a storm was coming. And she was good at it, better than good. She had an instinct for the sea, a natural understanding of its moods and rhythms. Her father never acknowledged it, but she could see the grudging respect in his eyes when she successfully predicted a change in the weather or suggested a new fishing spot that proved productive. The other men in the settlement noticed too. At first, they'd laughed at the idea of Jean-Baptiste bringing his daughter out on the boat, making crude jokes about women and the sea. But as the weeks passed, and the Rousseau family's catches consistently outpaced the others, the laughter died away, replaced by a wary respect. Isabella continued her studies with Monsieur Thibodeau in the evenings, now bringing practical questions from her days on the water. The old teacher was delighted, and together they pored over charts and navigation tables, discussing currents and tides, weather patterns and sailing techniques. "You have a gift, Isabella," he told her one night. "A true gift. I've known sailors with decades of experience who don't have your instinctive understanding of the sea." "What good is a gift I can never fully use?" Isabella asked, though there was less bitterness in her voice than there once had been. The days on the water had given her a taste of the life she longed for, and even if it was just fishing in a small boat, it was better than nothing. "Who says you can never use it?" Monsieur Thibodeau replied. "The world is changing, Isabella. There's a war on, in case you hadn't noticed. The British are blockading our ports, privateers are sailing under letters of marque, and the old rules are breaking down. In times of chaos, opportunities arise for those bold enough to seize them." Isabella thought about his words as she walked home that night, the stars bright overhead, the sound of the bayou a constant whisper in the darkness. She didn't know what opportunities might come her way, but she knew she would be ready for them when they did. Chapter 3. The Hurricane. The storm came in September, during the height of hurricane season. The signs had been there for days, the unusual stillness of the air, the strange behavior of the birds, the sickly yellow color of the sky at sunset. Monsieur Thibodeau had warned the settlement, urging families to prepare, to secure their homes and boats, to lay in supplies of food and fresh water. Some listened. Others, including Jean-Baptiste Rousseau, dismissed the warnings as the paranoid ravings of an old man. "We've weathered storms before," he said when Marie begged him to take precautions. "This house has stood for 15 years. It'll stand for 15 more." But Isabella, who had learned to read the weather with the same skill she read books, knew this storm would be different. She could feel it in her bones, in the oppressive weight of the air. in the restless churning of the Gulf. She helped her mother secure what they could, bringing in the chickens, boarding up the windows, moving their most precious possessions to the highest shelves. The storm hit on a Tuesday afternoon, and it hit with a fury that none of them had anticipated. The wind came first, howling like a living thing, tearing at the houses and trees with savage force. Then came the rain, not falling but driving horizontally, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction. The Rousseau family huddled in their house as the storm raged around them. The walls shook, the roof groaned, and water began to seep in through cracks and gaps. Isabella held her mother close, trying to offer comfort even as her own heart raced with fear. "It'll pass," Jean-Baptiste said, but even he sounded uncertain. Storms always pass, but this storm didn't pass. It intensified, the wind reaching a pitch that sounded like the screaming of demons, and then came the storm surge, a wall of water that swept in from the Gulf, driven by the hurricane's fury. Isabella heard it before she saw it, a roaring sound like 1,000 waterfalls. "Get to the loft!" she screamed, but it was too late. The water hit the house like a battering ram, smashing through the walls and sweeping everything before it. Isabella felt herself lifted, tumbled, thrown about like a rag doll in the churning chaos. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't tell which way was up. Her lungs burned, her body screamed for air, and she thought, with a strange clarity, that this was how she would die. But then her hand struck something solid, a piece of timber, part of the roof perhaps, and she clung to it with desperate strength. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped, sucking in air and water in equal measure, coughing and choking but alive. The world was a nightmare of wind and water and darkness. She could see nothing, hear nothing but the storm. She clung to her piece of timber and prayed, though she wasn't sure to whom or for what. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day, an eternity of terror and exhaustion. Isabella drifted in and out of consciousness, her grip on the timber weakening, her body growing numb with cold despite the warm water. She thought of her family, wondered if they were alive or dead, and felt a grief so profound it was almost physical. When the storm finally passed and the sun broke through the clouds, Isabella found herself washed up on a muddy bank several miles from where the settlement had been. She was bruised, battered, and so weak she could barely move, but she was alive. She lay there for a long time, too exhausted to do anything but breathe. Eventually, she managed to sit up and look around. The landscape was unrecognizable, transformed by the storm into a wasteland of mud and debris. Trees had been uprooted, houses reduced to scattered timbers, boats smashed to kindling. "Hello?" she called, her voice hoarse and weak. "Is anyone there?" No answer came. Isabella forced herself to stand, her legs shaking, and began to walk. She had to find her family, had to know if they'd survived. She stumbled through the devastation, calling out, searching, but finding only destruction. It took her hours to reach what had been Boyuo La Batre, or rather, what was left of it. The settlement was gone, wiped away, as if it had never existed. A few structures still stood, or partially stood, but most had been reduced to rubble. Bodies lay scattered among the debris, and Isabella had to force herself to check each one, dreading what she might find. She found her father first, his body trapped beneath a fallen tree. He was dead, his eyes open and staring, his face frozen in an expression of surprise. Isabella knelt beside him, and to her own surprise, she felt tears on her cheeks. Despite everything, despite his coldness and his cruelty, he had been her father, and she had never stopped hoping that someday he might love her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, closing his eyes. "I'm sorry you never found peace." She found her mother an hour later, her body washed up against the remains of the schoolhouse. Marie Rousseau looked almost peaceful, as if she were merely sleeping, and Isabella broke down completely, sobbing over her mother's body, crying out her grief and rage and despair. Michel she found near the docks, or what had been the docks. He too was dead, his neck broken, his young face pale and still. But Antoine she couldn't find. She searched until darkness fell, calling his name until her voice gave out, but there was no sign of him. She didn't know if that meant he was alive or if his body had been swept out to sea, and the uncertainty was almost worse than knowing. As night fell, Isabella took shelter in the partial remains of Monsieur Thibodeau's schoolhouse. The old teacher was gone. She'd found his body earlier, crushed beneath the collapsed roof, but some of his books had survived, protected by the oilcloth he'd wrapped them in. She gathered them carefully, these precious repositories of knowledge, and held them close like talismans against the darkness. She wasn't alone in the ruins. As the night wore on, other survivors began to emerge from wherever they'd taken shelter. Isabella counted them. 23 people out of a settlement that had housed nearly 200. 23 souls who had somehow survived the storm's fury. Among them, to her overwhelming relief, was Antoine. He was injured, his left arm broken and his face badly bruised, but he was alive. They fell into each other's arms, weeping. Two orphans clinging to each other in the ruins of their world. "Mama?" Antoine asked, though he must have known the answer from Isabella's expression. "Gone," Isabella said. "Papa and Michelle, too. They're all gone. They buried their family the next day, along with the other dead. There were too many bodies and too few survivors to dig individual graves. So they dug a mass grave and laid them all to rest together, saying what prayers they could remember." Isabella stood at the edge of the grave, looking down at the shrouded forms, and felt something inside her harden even further. She had lost everything. Her family, her home, her entire world. But she was still alive, and she would survive. She would do whatever it took to survive. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and desperation. The survivors banded together, pooling their meager resources, but there was little to pool. The storm had taken everything: food, fresh water, tools, boats. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the will to live. Isabella and Antoine, along with a few other young people, took to foraging in the ruins and the surrounding wilderness, searching for anything edible. They found some stores of food that had been protected in sealed containers, some fruit from trees that had somehow survived, some fish they managed to catch in the bayou using improvised nets. It was barely enough to keep them alive. Isabella's medical knowledge, limited as it was, proved invaluable. She treated injuries, set Antoine's broken arm, and did what she could to prevent infection and disease. But without proper supplies or medicines, there was only so much she could do, and several of the survivors died in the weeks following the storm, their bodies too weakened to fight off illness. The settlement of Boyuo La Batre, which had stood for nearly 20 years, was finished. Some of the survivors eventually made their way to Mobile or other settlements, seeking help from relatives or friends. Others simply disappeared into the wilderness, preferring to take their chances alone rather than stay in the place that had become a graveyard. Isabella and Antoine stayed, not out of any attachment to the place, but because they had nowhere else to go. They built a crude shelter from salvaged timber and tried to eke out an existence from fishing and foraging. It was a hard, hungry life, and there were days when Isabella wondered if it wouldn't have been better to have died in the storm with the rest of her family. But she was too stubborn to give up, too determined to let the world beat her. She had survived the storm, and she would survive whatever came after. It was during this time, in the depths of their poverty and desperation, that Isabella began to change. The sweet girl who had once helped her mother with the preserves and dreamed of adventure was gone, burned away by grief and hardship. In her place was someone harder, colder, more calculating, someone who understood that the world was cruel and that survival meant being willing to do whatever was necessary. She and Antoine took to fishing in the Gulf, using a small boat they'd managed to salvage and repair. It was dangerous work. The boat was barely seaworthy, and they had no proper equipment, but it was the only way they could get enough food to survive. They sold what they caught to passing ships or to the few traders who still came through the area, trading fish for flour, salt, and other necessities. Isabella proved to be a skilled negotiator, able to drive hard bargains and get the best prices for their catch. She was also willing to bend the rules when necessary, trading with smugglers and pirates who operated in the Gulf, men who asked no questions and paid in gold rather than credit. "You're playing a dangerous game," Antoine warned her one day after she'd concluded a deal with a particularly rough-looking crew. "Those men are criminals." "We're all criminals when we're desperate enough," Isabella replied. "Besides, their money spends as well as anyone else's." Antoine couldn't argue with that. They needed every penny they could get, and he knew his sister was right. Still, he worried about her, about the way she was changing, about the hardness he saw in her eyes. But Isabella didn't have the luxury of worrying about such things. She was too busy trying to survive, too focused on making it through each day to think about what kind of person she was becoming. The months passed, and slowly, painfully, they began to rebuild some semblance of a life. They improved their shelter, acquired better fishing equipment, and even managed to save a small amount of money. It wasn't much, but it was something, a foundation they could build on. Isabella continued to study in what little spare time she had, poring over the books she'd saved from Monsieur Thibodeau's library by the light of their fire. She studied navigation and seamanship, medicine and mathematics, history and geography. Knowledge was the one thing the storm hadn't been able to take from her, and she clung to it like a lifeline. She also began to dream again, not the naive dreams of her childhood, but harder, more practical dreams. She dreamed of having her own ship, of sailing wherever she wanted, of being beholden to no one. She dreamed of wealth and freedom and power, of never being helpless again. They were dangerous dreams, impossible dreams, but they kept her going through the long, hard days and the cold, hungry nights. And sometimes, when she was out on the Gulf with the wind in her face and the sun on her back, she could almost believe they might come true. Part 2. The Capture. Chapter 4. The Ship from the South. It was a clear morning in April of 1814 when Isabella saw the ship. She and Antoine had been out since before dawn, checking their crab traps in the deeper waters of the Gulf. The fishing had been good lately, and they'd managed to accumulate a small but respectable catch that they planned to sell in Mobile. Isabella was at the stern of their boat, pulling up one of the traps, when she noticed the sails on the horizon. Ships were a common sight in these waters, merchant vessels traveling between New Orleans and Mobile, fishing boats from other settlements, occasionally a naval vessel on patrol. She paid it little attention at first, focused on her work. But as the morning wore on, she noticed that the ship seemed to be drawing closer, its course bringing it directly toward them. She shaded her eyes against the sun and studied it more carefully. It was a large vessel, a three-masted schooner by the look of it, flying no flag that she could see. "Antoine," she called to her brother, who was working at the bow. "Take a look at that ship. Does something seem off to you?" Antoine straightened and looked where she was pointing. He watched for a moment, then frowned. "It's coming right at us." "Why would it do that?" "I don't know," Isabella said, but a prickle of unease ran down her spine. "Maybe we should head back to shore." But before they could act on that impulse, the ship was upon them, its shadow falling across their small boat like a dark omen. Isabella looked up at the towering masts and the men lining the rails, and her unease blossomed into full-fledged fear. These were not merchants or fishermen. These were hard men, with harder eyes, armed with cutlasses and pistols, and they were looking at Isabella and Antoine like wolves looking at sheep. A rope ladder was thrown down, and a man descended to their boat with easy grace. He was tall and lean, with dark hair tied back in a queue, and a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. He wore a captain's coat, though it was salt-stained and weathered, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who was used to being obeyed. "Good morning," he said, his voice pleasant enough, though his eyes were cold. "Captain Marcus Reeves, at your service." "And you are?" Isabella's mind raced. She'd heard stories of pirates operating in the Gulf, preying on merchant ships and coastal settlements, but she'd never expected to encounter them herself. She thought about lying, about giving false names, But something told her this man would see through any deception. Isabella Rousseau, she said, keeping her voice steady. This is my brother, Antoine. We're just fishing. We don't have anything of value. Captain Reeves smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, I think you have something of value. You have yourselves? We're short-handed, you see, and we're always looking for new crew members. We're not interested, Antoine said, his voice hard. He'd moved to stand beside Isabella, his hand on the knife at his belt. Leave us alone. The captain's smile widened. I'm afraid I wasn't asking. You see, when Captain Marcus Reeves extends an invitation, it's considered very rude to refuse. He gestured, and suddenly the rail of the ship above them was lined with men pointing muskets down at them. Now, are you going to come aboard peacefully, or do we need to do this the hard way? Isabella felt Antoine tense beside her, knew he was considering fighting, and put a hand on his arm. Don't, she said quietly. We can't win this. Listen to your sister, Captain Reeves said approvingly. She's got sense. Now, up you come. And don't try anything foolish. My men have itchy trigger fingers. They had no choice. Isabella and Antoine climbed the rope ladder to the deck of the ship, leaving their boat and their catch behind. As soon as they were aboard, rough hands grabbed them, searching them for weapons and finding Antoine's knife, which was quickly confiscated. The deck of the ship was a scene of organized chaos. Men were everywhere, working the rigging, swabbing the deck, repairing equipment. They all stopped to stare at the new arrivals, and Isabella heard crude laughter and cruder comments about what a pretty thing she was. She kept her face blank, refusing to show fear, but inside her heart was pounding. She'd heard stories about what happened to women captured by pirates, and none of them ended well. Captain Reeves seemed to read her thoughts. Don't worry, my dear, he said, his tone mocking. We're not savages. You'll be treated fairly, as long as you work hard and follow orders. We're a democracy here, you see. Every man has a vote, and we abide by a code. No one will harm you without facing the consequences. How reassuring, Isabella said dryly, and several of the pirates laughed. She's got spirit, one of them called out. I like that. Spirit's all well and good, Captain Reeves said, but what we need is workers. You, boy, he pointed at Antoine, you'll work as a deckhand. You look strong enough. And you, he turned to Isabella, you'll work in the galley. We need another cook. I ain't scared of pirates, Antoine suddenly shouted, his young voice cracking with bravado and fear. You can't make us do anything! The laughter that followed was loud and mocking, and Isabella saw her brother's face flush with humiliation. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would be all right, but she didn't know if that was true. Take them below, Captain Reeves ordered. Get them settled, and someone explain the rules to them. I don't want any trouble. They were separated immediately. Antoine was led away by a group of rough-looking sailors, and Isabella was taken below decks to the galley, a cramped, hot space that smelled of smoke and grease and unwashed bodies. The ship's cook was a massive man named Briggs, with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been on the losing end of too many fights. He looked Isabella up and down with an expression that was hard to read. So you're the new help? He said, his voice a low rumble. You know how to cook? Yes, Isabella said. I can cook. Good, because if you can't, you're useless to me, and useless people don't last long on this ship. You'll work from before dawn until after dark. You'll prepare 3 meals a day for a crew of 60 men. You'll keep this galley clean, and you'll do whatever else I tell you to do. Understood? Understood, Isabella said. And one more thing. Briggs leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. You stay out of the crew's way. Don't talk to them unless you have to. Don't look at them. Don't give them any reason to notice you. Because if they do notice you, if they start thinking of you as something other than just another crew member, things will get very bad for you very quickly. Captain's rules or no captain's rules. You understand what I'm saying? Isabella understood perfectly. Yes. Good, Briggs straightened. Now get to work. Supper needs to be ready in 3 hours, and we're low on supplies, so you'll have to be creative." The days that followed were a blur of exhausting labor. Isabella worked from before dawn until long after dark, preparing meals for the crew, cleaning the galley, managing the ship's meager food stores. It was hard, brutal work, made worse by the constant motion of the ship and the oppressive heat below decks. But Isabella had survived worse. She'd survived the hurricane, survived the desperate months that followed. She could survive this, too. She saw Antoine only occasionally, usually at mealtimes when he came through the galley line with the other deckhands. He looked tired and bruised, and she knew the work was hard on him, but he was surviving too. They exchanged brief glances, silent communications of support and solidarity, but they had no opportunity to talk. The crew treated them with a mixture of contempt and amusement. They were the new fish, the landlubbers who'd been pressed into service, and they were the butt of constant jokes and pranks. But as long as they did their work and stayed out of the way, they were left mostly alone. Isabella quickly learned the rhythms of life aboard a pirate ship. She learned that the crew was indeed governed by a code, a set of rules that everyone had agreed to and that were enforced with brutal efficiency. Theft from another crew member was punishable by marooning. Cowardice in battle was punishable by death. Disputes were settled by vote or by duel, and everyone, from the captain down to the lowest deckhand, received a share of whatever prizes they took. She also learned that Captain Reeves, for all his cold eyes and cruel smile, was a skilled commander who ran a tight ship. He was fair in his way, distributing the work and the rewards equally, and he didn't tolerate bullying or abuse of the weaker crew members. It was a strange kind of honor among thieves, but it was honor nonetheless. Chapter 5. The Transformation. Isabella had been aboard the ship for 2 months when everything changed. She'd settled into the brutal routine of her work, had learned to navigate the complex social dynamics of the crew, had even begun to earn a grudging respect from Briggs for her cooking skills and her ability to make something palatable out of the ship's limited supplies. She'd also learned to make herself as invisible as possible. She wore loose, shapeless clothes that hid her figure. She kept her hair tied back in a tight bun and covered with a kerchief. She kept her eyes down and her mouth shut. She became a ghost, a shadow, someone the crew looked through rather than at. It was a survival strategy, and it worked. The crude comments and leering looks had mostly stopped, and she was able to do her work without constant harassment. But it came at a cost. She felt herself disappearing, becoming less than human, just another piece of equipment on the ship. Then one day, everything changed. It started when one of the crew members, a young sailor named Tom, came down with a fever. It was a common enough occurrence on a ship men lived in close quarters. Disease spread easily, and medical care was primitive at best. But this fever was different. Tom's temperature spiked dangerously high. He became delirious, and within a day he was barely conscious. The ship had no doctor. They had a man who served as a surgeon of sorts, a former barber named Cutler, who could amputate a limb or stitch a wound, but who knew nothing about treating disease. He looked at Tom, shook his head, and said the boy would probably die. Isabella, who had been bringing food to the sick bay, overheard this pronouncement. She thought of Monsieur Thibodeau, of the medical texts she'd studied, of the treatments she'd learned. She knew what Tom had. It was a marsh fever, probably contracted during their last stop at a coastal settlement, and she knew how to treat it. "I can help him," she said quietly. Cutler turned to look at her, his expression skeptical. "You? What do you know about medicine?" "Enough," Isabella said. "I've treated this kind of fever before. I know what to do." "Let her try," said a voice from the doorway. Isabella turned to see Captain Reeves standing there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "If Cutler says the boy's going to die anyway, what harm can she do?" Cutler shrugged. "Fine, but when he dies, it's on her head, not mine." Isabella ignored him and knelt beside Tom's hammock. She examined him carefully, noting his symptoms, checking his pulse and his breathing. Then she turned to Cutler. I need willow bark, if you have it. And feverfew. And clean water. Lots of it. And cool cloths. We don't have feverfew, Cutler said. Used the last of it 2 weeks ago. Isabella thought quickly. What about chamomile? Or mint? We have mint. The cook uses it. That'll work. Get it. And the other things I asked for. For the next 3 days, Isabella barely left Tom's side. She brewed teas from the willow bark and mint, forcing them down his throat even when he was too delirious to swallow properly. She bathed him with cool water to bring down his fever. She monitored his breathing and his pulse, adjusting her treatments as needed. She barely slept, barely ate, focused entirely on keeping the young sailor alive. And slowly, miraculously, Tom began to improve. His fever broke on the 3rd day, and by the 4th day he was conscious and coherent, weak but clearly on the mend. The crew was amazed. Word spread quickly through the ship that the cook's assistant had saved Tom's life, that she knew medicine, that she had skills beyond just preparing food. Men who had barely noticed her before suddenly looked at her with new respect. Captain Reeves summoned her to his cabin. It was the first time Isabella had been in the captain's quarters, and she was struck by how different it was from the rest of the ship. Where the crew's quarters were cramped and filthy, the captain's cabin was spacious and relatively clean, with a large desk, a proper bed, and even a few books on a shelf. You saved Tom's life, the captain said without preamble. Where did you learn to do that? I had a teacher, Isabella said. Back in Boyuo La Batre, before the hurricane. He taught me many things. Including medicine? Including medicine. Captain Reeves studied her for a long moment. You're an interesting woman, Isabella Rousseau. You're wasted in the galley. From now on, you'll serve as the ship's surgeon. Cutler can go back to being a regular crew member. You'll have your own quarters, a larger share of the prizes, and the respect due to an officer of this ship. Isabella's heart leaped, but she kept her expression neutral. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me. You earned it. But there's one more thing. He gestured to a woman who had been standing in the shadows of the cabin, someone Isabella hadn't noticed before. This is Zara. She's well, let's just say she's under my protection. She's going to help you with something. The woman stepped forward, and Isabella got her first good look at her. Zara was tall and striking, with dark skin and intelligent eyes. She was dressed in men's clothing, but unlike Isabella's shapeless garments, hers were well-fitted and of good quality. You've been hiding, Zara said, her voice rich and melodious, making yourself invisible. I understand why it's a good survival strategy. But now that you're an officer, you can't hide anymore. You need to command respect, and you can't do that looking like a scarecrow. I don't understand, Isabella said. She's going to clean you up, Captain Reeves said. Make you presentable. You're an officer now, Isabella. You need to look like one. Isabella wanted to protest, to say that she was fine as she was, but she bit her tongue. The captain was right. If she was going to be the ship's surgeon, if she was going to command the respect of the crew, she needed to look the part. Zara led her to a small cabin that would now be Isabella's quarters. It was tiny, barely larger than a closet, but it was private, with a hammock and a small chest for her belongings. It was luxury compared to the corner of the galley where she'd been sleeping. Sit, Zara commanded, pointing to a stool. Isabella sat, and Zara began to work. First, she brought a basin of warm water and soap, real soap, not the harsh lye soap the crew used, and washed Isabella's face and hands. Then she took down Isabella's hair, which hadn't been properly washed or brushed in months, and began the long process of working out the tangles and knots. It hurt. Isabella gritted her teeth as Zara pulled and tugged, but she didn't complain. Slowly, painfully, her hair was transformed from a matted mess into something smooth and manageable. Zara brushed it until it shone, the blonde strands catching the light from the lantern. You have beautiful hair, Zara said. Why have you been hiding it? Because beautiful things attract attention, Isabella said, and attention is dangerous. Sometimes, Zara agreed, But sometimes attention is power. You need to learn the difference. Next came the clothes. Zara had brought a dress, a simple but well-made garment in a deep blue that brought out the color of Isabella's eyes. Isabella looked at it with dismay. "I can't wear that," she said. "I need to be able to move, to work." "You can wear it," Zara said firmly. "And you will. At least for now, while the crew gets used to seeing you as an officer rather than a servant. Later, you can wear whatever you want. But first impressions matter." Reluctantly, Isabella put on the dress. It fit well, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror Zara produced, she barely recognized the woman looking back at her. Gone was the dirty, shapeless creature who had haunted the galley. In her place was someone who looked almost elegant. "There," Zara said with satisfaction. "Now you look like someone worth respecting." When Isabella emerged from her cabin and made her way up to the deck, the reaction was immediate and dramatic. Men stopped what they were doing and stared. Some of them looked shocked, others appreciative, a few hostile. But all of them noticed her, really noticed her, for the first time. Isabella felt exposed, vulnerable, but she forced herself to stand tall, to meet their gazes without flinching. She was an officer now. She had earned her place on this ship, and she would not be intimidated. "Well, well," said a voice behind her. She turned to see the first mate, a grizzled veteran named Hawkins, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and approval. "Looks like we've got ourselves a proper ship's surgeon now. Welcome to the officers' mess, Miss Rousseau." "Thank you," Isabella said, and was pleased to hear that her voice was steady. Over the following days, Isabella settled into her new role. She set up a proper sick bay, organizing the medical supplies and creating a system for treating injuries and illnesses. She treated everything from minor cuts and bruises to more serious ailments, and her success rate was impressive. The crew, initially skeptical of having a woman as their surgeon, quickly came to trust her skills. She also began to learn more about the ship and its operations. As an officer, she was privy to the captain's councils, where decisions about targets and tactics were made. She learned about the various merchant routes, about which ships were worth pursuing and which were too well defended. She learned about the politics of piracy, about the complex web of alliances and rivalries that existed among the various pirate crews operating in the Gulf. And she learned about Zara, the woman who had transformed her. Zara, it turned out, was far more than just Captain Reeves's mistress. She was his advisor, his confidant, and in many ways the real power behind the throne. She was brilliant and ruthless, with a mind for strategy that rivaled the captain's own. "Why did you help me?" Isabella asked her one day as they sat together in Zara's cabin, sharing a bottle of rum that Zara had produced from some hidden cache. Zara smiled. "Because I saw something in you. A strength, a determination. You remind me of myself when I was younger. And because I'm tired of being the only woman on this ship who has any power. It's lonely at the top, Isabella. I thought you might be someone I could talk to, someone who would understand." "How did you end up here?" Isabella asked. "If you don't mind me asking." Zara's expression grew distant. "I was born a slave," she said quietly, "on a plantation in Jamaica. I was sold when I was 12 to a merchant who brought me to New Orleans. He was not a kind man. When I was 16, I killed him, stabbed him in his sleep, and ran. I ended up on the docks, desperate and starving, and Marcus found me. He gave me a choice, join his crew or be turned over to the authorities. I chose the crew, and you became his mistress?" "Eventually, but first I proved myself. I worked as hard as any man, fought as fiercely, thought as cleverly. I earned my place here, Isabella, just as you're earning yours. And when Marcus and I became lovers, it was because we chose each other, not because he owned me. That's the difference. That's what freedom means." Isabella thought about that. Freedom. It was something she'd dreamed of, but she'd never really understood what it meant. Now, for the first time, she was beginning to see. Chapter 6. The Hunt. The ship, Isabella learned, was called the Serpent's Tooth, and it had been hunting merchant vessels in the Gulf of Mexico for 3 years. Captain Reeves had a reputation as a cunning and ruthless pirate, someone who chose his targets carefully and struck with precision. He avoided naval vessels and well-armed merchantmen, preferring to prey on smaller, more vulnerable ships that couldn't fight back effectively. It was a profitable business. The Serpent's Tooth had taken dozens of prizes, accumulating a small fortune in gold, silver, and trade goods. The crew was well paid and well fed, and morale was high. They were successful, and success bred loyalty. Isabella watched and learned. She observed how Captain Reeves planned his attacks, how he used the weather and the currents to his advantage, how he positioned his ship for maximum effect. She saw how he motivated his crew, how he balanced discipline with democracy, how he maintained order without resorting to the brutal punishments common on naval vessels. She also saw the violence. The first time the Serpent's Tooth attacked a merchant ship, Isabella was in the sick bay, preparing for the inevitable casualties. She heard the boom of the cannons, the screams of men, the clash of steel on steel, and then the wounded began to arrive, men with sword cuts and gunshot wounds, with broken bones and burns from the cannons. She worked through the chaos with steady hands, stitching wounds, setting bones, doing what she could to save lives. Some men she could help. Others were beyond help, and she held their hands as they died, offering what comfort she could. It was brutal, bloody work, and it left her shaken, but it also left her with a strange sense of purpose. She was saving lives, even in the midst of this violence. She was making a difference. Antoine, she learned, had adapted to life aboard the Serpent's Tooth better than she'd expected. He'd grown stronger and more confident, and he'd earned the respect of the other deckhands through his hard work and his willingness to learn. He was still young, still sometimes reckless, but he was surviving. They managed to talk occasionally, brief conversations snatched in quiet moments. Antoine was proud of his sister's rise to officer status, though he worried about her. "Are you all right?" he asked her one evening as they stood at the rail, watching the sun set over the Gulf. "Really all right? This life?" "It's not what we expected." "No," Isabella agreed. "It's not. But we're alive, Antoine. We're surviving. That's more than a lot of people can say. But for how long?" Antoine asked. "How long can we keep doing this? Sooner or later, our luck will run out. Sooner or later, we'll encounter a ship we can't beat, or a storm we can't weather. Or we'll die," Isabella finished. "Yes, that's possible. But it's also possible we'll live. That we'll get rich enough to buy our freedom, to start over somewhere else. We just have to be smart, Antoine. We have to be careful and patient and smart." Antoine nodded, but he didn't look convinced. The weeks passed, and the Serpent's Tooth continued its predatory cruise through the Gulf. They took 3 more prizes, each one adding to the crew's growing wealth. Isabella's share, as an officer, was substantial, and she began to accumulate a small fortune of her own. She kept it hidden in her cabin, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into a secret compartment in her sea chest. She also continued her studies, reading the books in Captain Reeves's library whenever she had the chance. She studied navigation and tactics, learning everything she could about the art of sailing and fighting at sea. She asked questions of the more experienced crew members, absorbing their knowledge like a sponge. Zara noticed her dedication and encouraged it. "You're thinking ahead," she said approvingly. "That's good. Never stop learning, Isabella. Knowledge is power, especially for women like us." "Women like us?" "Women who refuse to accept the limitations others try to place on us," Zara said. "Women who want more than what the world says we're allowed to have." Isabella thought about that. It was true. She did want more. She wanted freedom, yes, but she also wanted power. She wanted to be in control of her own destiny, to never again be at the mercy of others. And she was beginning to see that the only way to achieve that was to become someone who couldn't be ignored. someone who commanded respect through skill and strength. It was during this time that Isabella began to truly understand the dynamics of the pirate crew. She learned that while Captain Reeves was nominally in charge, his authority was far from absolute. The crew could vote him out if they were dissatisfied with his leadership, and he knew it. He maintained his position through a combination of skill, success, and careful management of the crew's expectations. She also learned about the various factions within the crew. There were the old hands, veterans who had been with Captain Reeves from the beginning. There were the newer recruits, men who had joined more recently and who were still proving themselves. And there were the malcontents, men who chafed under any authority and who were always looking for an opportunity to advance their own interests. One of these malcontents was a man named Garrett, a hulking brute with a mean streak and a chip on his shoulder. He'd been passed over for promotion to officer several times, and he resented anyone who had achieved what he hadn't. He particularly resented Isabella, a woman who had risen to officer status in a matter of months. He made his feelings known through snide comments and hostile looks, and Isabella knew it was only a matter of time before he tried something more direct. She prepared herself, making sure she was never alone in isolated parts of the ship, always keeping a knife within reach. The confrontation came one evening when Isabella was in the sick bay, organizing supplies. Garrett appeared in the doorway, blocking her exit, his expression ugly. "Think you're something special, don't you?" he said, his words slurred with rum. "Think you're better than the rest of us because the captain gave you a fancy title." Isabella straightened, her hand moving casually to the knife at her belt. "I think I earned my position through skill and hard work," she said calmly. "The same way anyone else earns their position on this ship. Skill?" Garrett laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "The only skill you've got is spreading your legs for the captain." Isabella felt anger flare hot in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "That's not true, and you know it. Now get out of my way." "Or what?" Garrett took a step forward, and Isabella could smell the rum on his breath. "What are you going to do about it, little girl?" "She's not going to do anything," said a voice from behind Garrett. "But I am." Garrett spun around to find Zara standing there, a pistol in her hand, pointed directly at his chest. Her expression was cold and utterly calm. "You have two choices," Zara said. "You can apologize to Isabella and leave, or you can find out what it feels like to have a ball of lead in your gut. Choose quickly. My patience is limited." Garrett looked from Zara to Isabella and back again. He was drunk, but he wasn't stupid. He knew Zara would shoot him without hesitation, and he knew the captain would back her up. "Sorry," he muttered, not meeting Isabella's eyes. Then he turned and stumbled away. Zara lowered the pistol and smiled at Isabella. "You handled that well," she said. "Stayed calm, didn't let him provoke you. But you need to be more careful. Men like Garrett are dangerous, especially when they've been drinking." "I know," Isabella said. "Thank you for intervening." "That's what friends do," Zara said. "We look out for each other. Remember that, Isabella. In this world, the only people you can truly trust are the ones who have as much to lose as you do." It was a lesson Isabella took to heart. Chapter 7. The Robin Hood Phase. The morning sun cast long shadows across the deck of the Liberté as Isabella stood at the helm, her spyglass trained on the merchant vessel ahead. The ship flew Spanish colors and sat low in the water, a sure sign of heavy cargo. But this was no ordinary raid. Isabella had spent weeks gathering intelligence, and she knew exactly what lay in that hold. Tax revenues extracted from the poorest fishing villages along the coast, destined for the coffers of wealthy colonial administrators in Havana. "Captain," Miguel called from his position near the mainmast. "She's a fat one. Must be carrying a fortune." Isabella lowered her spyglass, her expression thoughtful. "Indeed, a fortune stolen from people who can barely feed their families." She raised her voice so the entire crew could hear. "Listen well, my brothers and sisters. Today we take back what was stolen. Every peso in that hold was wrung from the hands of fishermen, farmers, and craftsmen who could ill afford to part with it. Today, we return it to them. A cheer rose from the crew. In the 6 months since they'd begun their campaign along the Gulf Coast, Isabella's reputation had transformed. No longer was she simply a pirate, she had become something more, a champion of the downtrodden, a thorn in the side of corrupt officials and greedy merchants who exploited the poor. "Raise the black flag," Isabella commanded. "Let them know who comes for them." The skull and crossed swords unfurled against the azure sky, and Isabella felt the familiar thrill of the hunt course through her veins. But it was different now. Every raid had purpose. Every prize had meaning beyond mere gold. The merchant vessel tried to run, but the Liberté was faster, sleeker, built for speed rather than cargo. Within an hour, they had closed the distance. Isabella stood at the bow, her long dark hair whipping in the wind, her hand resting on the hilt of her cutlass. "Fire a warning shot across their bow," she ordered. The cannon roared, and a plume of water erupted 50 yards ahead of the merchant ship. The vessel's captain, a portly Spaniard named Rodrigo Mendez, appeared at the rail, his face pale with fear. "Strike your colors and prepare to be boarded," Isabella called across the water. "Resist, and you'll find the bottom of the Gulf. Comply, and you'll live to sail another day." Mendez was no fool. He'd heard the stories of La Capitana, the pirate queen who showed mercy to those who surrendered, but was ruthless to those who fought. His flag came down, and within minutes, Isabella's crew had secured the vessel. Isabella strode across the boarding plank with the confidence of a woman who had done this 100 times. Her boots clicked against the deck as she approached Captain Mendez, who stood trembling beside his first mate. "Captain Mendez," Isabella said, her voice carrying the cultured accent of her French upbringing mixed with the harder edges she'd acquired in her years at sea. "I understand you carry tax revenues from the coastal villages." "I am but a humble merchant," Mendez protested. "I carry goods for—" "Do not insult my intelligence," Isabella interrupted, her dark eyes flashing. "I know exactly what you carry and where it came from. Miguel, search the hold. Bring me the manifest." Miguel disappeared below decks while Isabella waited, her gaze never leaving Mendez. The man shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning breeze. When Miguel returned, he carried a leather-bound ledger and a satisfied grin. "Captain, you were right. 40,000 pesos in silver, collected from 17 villages along the coast. The manifest shows the amounts taken from each settlement." Isabella took the ledger and flipped through its pages, her jaw tightening as she read the figures. "San Miguel, 2,000 pesos. They have barely 300 families. Petit Caillou, 1,500 pesos. That village was nearly destroyed by the hurricane last year." She looked up at Mendez, her expression cold. "You and your masters are vultures, feeding on the desperate." "I only follow orders," Mendez stammered. "The colonial government is corrupt," Isabella said flatly. "But today, Captain, you have the opportunity to do something right. You will sail back to Havana and tell your masters that their blood money has been reclaimed. Tell them that La Capitana sends her regards." She turned to her crew. "Transfer the silver to the Liberté. Leave them enough provisions to reach port, but take everything else of value. And Captain Mendez?" She fixed him with a penetrating stare. "If I hear that you've returned to this trade, if I learn that you've taken one more peso from these people, I will find you. And next time, I will not be so merciful. Do we understand each other?" Mendez nodded vigorously, relief washing over his features. The transfer took 2 hours. When it was complete, Isabella stood once more at the helm of the Liberté, watching as the merchant vessel limped away toward the horizon. Beside her, Brother Antoine made the sign of the cross. "You did a good thing today, Isabella," he said quietly. "We did a good thing," she corrected. "This crew, this family we've built, we did this together." Over the following weeks, Isabella and her crew became ghosts along the Gulf Coast, appearing without warning to strike at the wealthy and corrupt. They raided a plantation owner's ship carrying goods purchased with money owed to his workers. They intercepted a convoy of merchants who had been price gouging coastal communities during a food shortage. They captured a slave ship and freed its human cargo, providing them with supplies and directions to settlements where they might find refuge. But Isabella didn't simply take, she gave back. After each raid, the Liberté would appear in the night at small fishing villages and poor settlements. Her crew would unload silver, food, tools, and supplies, leaving them on the docks with a simple note. From La Capitana, with justice. The people began to speak of her in whispers, then in songs. She became a legend, a figure of hope in a world that offered little to the poor and powerless. Mothers told their children stories of the pirate queen who fought for the forgotten. Fishermen raised their cups in her honor, and the wealthy merchants and corrupt officials learned to fear the sight of black sails on the horizon. It was on a warm evening in late summer that Isabella finally returned to Boyuo La Batre. She had not set foot in her childhood home since the day she'd left with Brother Antoine, and her heart hammered in her chest as the Liberté glided into the familiar waters of the bayou. The settlement had changed little in the years since her departure. The same weathered docks stretched into the water. The same simple houses lined the shore. But as the ship drew closer, Isabella could see the signs of hardship, roofs in need of repair, boats that had seen better days, faces marked by hunger and struggle. "Drop anchor here," Isabella commanded. "We'll go ashore in the longboat." She chose a small party, Brother Antoine, Miguel, Zara, and Thomas, a former slave they'd freed who had proven himself a capable sailor and fierce fighter. As they rowed toward the dock, Isabella felt the weight of memory pressing down on her. This was where she'd been born, where she'd been resented and rejected, where she'd learned that the world could be cruel to those who didn't fit its narrow definitions. A crowd had gathered on the dock, drawn by the sight of the pirate ship. Isabella could see recognition dawning on some faces, confusion on others. She stepped onto the dock with her head held high, her hand resting on her cutlass not in threat, but in readiness. "I am Isabella Rousseau," she announced, her voice carrying across the water. "Some of you may remember me. I was born here, though I was never truly welcome. I left this place years ago, and I have returned not for revenge, but for redemption, yours and mine." An old woman pushed through the crowd, her face weathered by sun and hardship. It was Madame Thibault, who had been kind to Isabella when she was a child, one of the few who had shown her any warmth. "Isabella?" the old woman said, her voice trembling. "Is it truly you? We heard stories, but we thought they were just tales." "They are not tales, madame," Isabella replied, her voice softening. "I am La Capitana, and I have come to help rebuild what has been broken." She gestured to her crew, who began unloading crates from the longboat. "In these crates, you will find silver enough to repair your homes, your boats, your lives. You will find tools and supplies. You will find hope." A murmur ran through the crowd, disbelief mixing with desperate hope. A man stepped forward, Pierre Gautier, who had been one of the loudest voices calling for Isabella's expulsion when she was a child. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you help us after how we treated you?" Isabella met his gaze steadily. "Because I am not you, Monsieur Gautier. Because I choose to be better than the cruelty I received. Because these people," she gestured to the crowd, "deserve a chance at a decent life, regardless of what their fathers and mothers did to a frightened child years ago." She paused, then continued, her voice ringing with conviction. "But know this, I do not do this for your gratitude or your approval. I do this because it is right, because I have the power to help, and with power comes responsibility. Use what I give you wisely. Build something better than what came before. And perhaps, in time, you will learn to judge people not by their birth or their circumstances, but by their character and their choices." The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then Madame Thibault began to weep, and others joined her tears of relief, of shame, of gratitude. Pierre Gautier's face crumpled, and he fell to his knees. "Forgive us," he whispered. "Forgive us for what we did to you." Isabella looked down at him, and for a moment she was that frightened child again, desperate for acceptance. But she was also the woman she had become, strong, independent, forged by hardship into something unbreakable. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "But more importantly, you must forgive yourselves and do better. Teach your children that worth is not determined by birth. Teach them that every person deserves dignity and respect. That is how you repay this debt." Over the next 3 days, Isabella and her crew worked alongside the people of Boyuo La Batre. They repaired roofs and mended boats. They taught fishing techniques learned in distant waters. They shared stories and songs around evening fires, and slowly, the walls of resentment and shame began to crumble. On the final evening, as the sun set over the bayou in a blaze of orange and gold, Madame Thibault approached Isabella, where she sat on the dock, her feet dangling over the water. "You have become something remarkable," the old woman said, settling beside her with a soft grunt. "When you were a child, I saw the fire in you. I knew you would either be destroyed by this world or you would set it ablaze. I am glad to see which path you chose." Isabella smiled, a rare expression of genuine warmth. "I had help along the way. Brother Antoine showed me that strength could be tempered with compassion. My crew taught me the meaning of loyalty and family. And this place," she gestured to the settlement, "taught me what I did not want to become." "You have given us more than silver and supplies," Madame Thibault said. "You have given us a mirror to see ourselves clearly. That is a harder gift to accept, but a more valuable one." "Then use it well," Isabella replied. "Build something worth protecting. Create a community where no child is made to feel unwanted because of circumstances beyond their control." That night, as the Liberté prepared to depart, the entire settlement gathered on the shore. They sang songs of farewell and gratitude, their voices carrying across the water. Isabella stood at the helm, Brother Antoine beside her, and felt something shift in her heart, not quite closure, but perhaps the beginning of peace. "You did well, my child," Antoine said softly. "You have turned pain into purpose." "We are not finished yet," Isabella replied, her eyes on the horizon. "There are more settlements like this one, more people who need help. More corrupt officials and greedy merchants who need to learn that their actions have consequences." Miguel approached, a grin on his weathered face. "Captain, the crew wants you to know we're with you. Whatever you need, wherever you lead, we follow. You've shown us that piracy can be more than just taking. It can be about giving back, about justice." Isabella looked around at her crew, this family she had built from outcasts and misfits, from people who had been rejected by the world just as she had been. They stood ready, loyal, committed to the cause she had created. "Then we sail at dawn," she announced. "There is work to be done, and we are the ones to do it." As the Liberté slipped away from Boyuo La Batre in the pre-dawn darkness, Isabella stood at the bow, watching the settlement fade into the mist. She had returned to her past, confronted it, and emerged stronger. Now the future beckoned, full of possibility and purpose. The Robin Hood phase of her career had begun in earnest, and along the Gulf Coast, the legend of La Capitana would grow with each passing day. She was no longer just a pirate. She was a symbol of hope, a champion of the forgotten, a woman who had refused to let the world define her limits, and she was just getting started. Chapter 8. The Fur Trader. The port of Mobile bustled with activity as the Liberté glided into harbor on a crisp October morning. Isabella had chosen this particular port for resupply because it was neutral territory, neither fully Spanish nor American, but a crossroads where traders from all nations mingled with relative freedom. It was also far enough from her recent activities that she could move about without immediate recognition. "Miguel, oversee the resupply," Isabella instructed as they docked. "We need fresh water, provisions for 6 weeks, and ammunition. Brother Antoine, see to any crew members who need medical attention. Zara, you're with me. I want to gather intelligence on Spanish naval movements. The marketplace near the docks was a riot of color and sound. Merchants hawked their wares in a dozen languages: Spanish, French, English, various Native American tongues, and the Creole patois that had become the lingua franca of the Gulf Coast. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her captain's coat exchanged for a simple dress and shawl that allowed her to blend in with the other women shopping for their households. She was examining a bolt of fabric at a merchant's stall, listening to two Spanish sailors discuss their captain's orders, when a commotion erupted near the harbor master's office. A tall man with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin was arguing with a customs official, his French accent marking him as a voyageur from the Northern Territories. "I have paid your fees 3 times over," the man was saying, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I will not be extorted further. My furs are legally obtained, my papers are in order, and I have done nothing to warrant this harassment." The customs official, a weaselly Spaniard with a thin mustache, sneered. "Your papers are suspicious. I have the authority to confiscate your entire cargo pending investigation." Isabella watched with interest as the tall Frenchman's jaw clenched. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair pulled back in a queue, a strong jawline shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wore buckskin trousers and a linen shirt, and there was something about the way he carried himself, proud but not arrogant, strong but not brutish, that caught her attention. "This is theft, not law," the man said quietly, dangerously. The customs official laughed and gestured to 2 armed guards. "Arrest this man for threatening a colonial official." Isabella made her decision in an instant. She strode forward, her bearing transforming from humble shopper to commanding presence in a heartbeat. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the aristocratic French accent of her childhood. "Surely there is no need for such dramatics." The customs official turned to her, irritation flashing across his face. "This does not concern you, woman. Return to your shopping." "But it does concern me," Isabella replied smoothly, producing a small leather purse heavy with coins. "You see, I am in need of quality furs for a trading venture, and this gentleman appears to have exactly what I require. I propose a simple solution. I will purchase his entire cargo at fair market price, which will include sufficient funds to cover any administrative fees that might be owed." And she opened the purse, allowing the customs official to see the glint of gold. His eyes widened with greed. "Of course," Isabella continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "if you prefer to confiscate the cargo and deal with the paperwork, the investigation, the appeals to higher authorities, well, that is your choice. But I suspect this solution is more profitable for everyone involved." The customs official's greed warred with his pride for a moment before greed won. "Very well, but the fee is 50 pesos. 20, Isabella countered, "and not a peso more, or I walk away and you can explain to your superiors why you turned down a legitimate sale." They settled on 30 pesos, and within minutes, the transaction was complete. The customs official scurried away with his bribe, and Isabella turned to the tall Frenchman, who was regarding her with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "I am in your debt, mademoiselle," he said, bowing slightly. "Though I confess, I am curious why you would intervene on behalf of a stranger." "I dislike bullies," Isabella replied simply. "And corrupt officials are the worst kind of bullies. They hide behind the law while breaking it themselves." She extended her hand. "Isabella Rousseau." He took her hand, and she felt a jolt of something unexpected at his touch, warm, calloused, strong. "Jacques Beaumont," he said, "fur trader from the Northern Territories. And you have just purchased a cargo of beaver pelts, fox furs, and mink that I spent 6 months collecting." Isabella laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. "Then I suppose we should discuss what I'm going to do with them. Perhaps over dinner?" I find business is best conducted over good food and wine. Jacques' eyes crinkled with amusement. I would be honored, Mademoiselle Rousseau, though I should warn you I am a simple trader, not accustomed to fancy company. Then we shall get along perfectly, Isabella said, for I am not nearly as refined as I appear. They met that evening at a small tavern overlooking the bay, far from the more fashionable establishments where Isabella might be recognized. Jacques had cleaned up, his hair freshly washed and tied back, his shirt pressed, but he still carried the air of the wilderness about him, something untamed and honest, that Isabella found refreshing after months of dealing with duplicitous merchants and corrupt officials. Tell me about the Northern Territories, Isabella said, after they had ordered their meal. I have heard stories, but I suspect the reality is quite different from the tales. Jacques leaned back in his chair, a distant look in his eyes. It is a hard land, but a beautiful one. Forests that stretch to the horizon, rivers so clear you can see the stones on the bottom, winters so cold your breath freezes in the air. I spend months at a time in the wilderness, trapping and trading with the native tribes. It is a solitary life, but it suits me. Why? Isabella asked, genuinely curious. Why choose solitude over society? Because society is full of men like that customs official, Jacques replied. Men who care only for profit and power, who will cheat and steal and call it business. In the wilderness, things are simpler. You survive by your wits and your strength. You trade fairly, or you don't trade at all. There is an honesty to it that I find lacking in so-called civilization. Isabella felt a kinship with this man, this stranger who understood the corruption of the world and had chosen to step away from it. I understand that sentiment more than you know. And what of you, Mademoiselle Rousseau? Jacques asked. What brings a woman of obvious education and refinement to a rough port like Mobile, purchasing furs from desperate traders? Isabella hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. There was something about Jacques that made her want to be honest, to drop the masks she wore so constantly. But caution was a habit hard to break. I am a trader of sorts, she said carefully. I move goods along the coast, taking from those who have too much and providing for those who have too little. Jacques studied her for a long moment, his sea-gray eyes penetrating. You're La Capitana, he said quietly. The pirate queen they speak of in every port from Pensacola to New Orleans. Isabella's hand moved instinctively toward the knife concealed in her skirts, but Jacques raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. I mean you no harm, he said quickly. In fact, I admire what you do. The stories say you robbed the corrupt and helped the poor, that you freed a ship full of slaves and gave them their freedom, that you've rebuilt villages devastated by hurricanes and exploitation. If those stories are true, then you are doing more good than most so-called honest citizens. Isabella relaxed slightly, though she remained wary. And if I am this pirate queen, what then? Then I would say you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, Jacques replied, his voice sincere. And I would very much like to know you better, if you would permit it. Something in his tone, in the openness of his expression, touched Isabella deeply. She had been admired before for her beauty, her daring, her success. But Jacques seemed to see something deeper, something more essential. The stories are true, she admitted. I am La Capitana. I command a ship and a crew, and yes, I take from the wealthy and corrupt. But I am also just Isabella, a woman who was born unwanted and has spent her life proving that she has worth despite what others believed. Then I am honored to know just Isabella, Jacques said softly, and I hope she will allow me to know her better. They talked long into the night, the tavern emptying around them as they shared their stories. Jacques spoke of his childhood in Quebec, the son of a coureur de bois who had taught him the ways of the wilderness. He told her of the beauty and brutality of the fur trade, of the native peoples he had come to respect and admire, of the loneliness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him in the vast emptiness of the northern forests. Isabella, in turn, found herself opening up in ways she rarely did. She told him of her childhood in Boyuo La Batre, of the resentment and rejection she had faced, She spoke of Brother Antoine's kindness, of her years learning to sail and fight, of the moment she had decided to become more than what the world expected of her. "You are extraordinary," Jacques said when she had finished. "To take such pain and transform it into purpose that requires a strength most people never find. Or perhaps it requires desperation." Isabella replied with a wry smile. "When the world gives you no place, you must carve out your own." "No," Jacques said firmly. "It requires courage. Desperate people often become bitter and cruel. You became something better." They met again the next day, and the day after that. Jacques delayed his departure north, claiming he needed to arrange new trading contracts. Isabella extended her stay in Mobile, telling her crew they needed to gather more intelligence, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. They were falling in love. They walked along the beach at sunset, talking of everything and nothing. They explored the marketplace together, Jacques teaching her to identify quality furs, while Isabella shared her knowledge of navigation and the sea. They dined in quiet corners of taverns, their conversations ranging from philosophy to poetry to the practical matters of survival in a harsh world. One evening, as they sat on a secluded stretch of beach watching the stars emerge, Jacques took Isabella's hand. "I have never met anyone like you," he said quietly. "You are fierce and gentle, strong and vulnerable, practical and idealistic. You contain multitudes, Isabella Rousseau, and I find myself wanting to know every part of you." Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. She had known passion before brief encounters in various ports, physical connections that satisfied a need but touched nothing deeper. This was different. This was a man who saw her completely and wanted her anyway. "I am not an easy woman to love," she warned. "My life is dangerous. I have enemies who would kill me without hesitation. I cannot promise you safety or stability or any of the things a normal life might offer." "I do not want a normal life," Jacques replied. "I want you, however I can have you, for however long you will allow it." Isabella turned to him, her dark eyes searching his face in the starlight. "I am afraid," she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. "I have built walls around my heart, because I learned early that caring for people means giving them the power to hurt you. I am afraid that if I let you in, if I allow myself to love you, I will lose the strength that has kept me alive." Jacques cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of hard work. "Love does not make you weak, Isabella. It makes you stronger. It gives you something to fight for beyond yourself. And I promise you this, I will never use your love as a weapon against you. I will never try to cage you or change you or make you less than what you are." "How can you promise that?" Isabella whispered. "How can you accept what I am, a pirate, an outlaw, a woman who lives outside every rule society has made?" "Because I, too, live outside those rules," Jacques said simply. "Because I understand that true freedom means accepting people as they are, not as we wish them to be. I love your strength, Isabella. I love your courage and your compassion and your refusal to be diminished by a world that tried to make you small. I would never try to take those things from you." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes, a rare occurrence for a woman who had learned to hide her emotions behind a mask of confidence. "I love you," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "God help me, Jacques Beaumont, but I love you." He kissed her then, and it was like coming home to a place she had never been. His lips were warm and gentle, his arms strong around her, and for the first time in her life, Isabella felt truly safe. Not because Jacques would protect her, she needed no protection, but because he accepted her completely, without reservation or condition. They made love that night on the beach, the stars wheeling overhead, and the waves providing a rhythmic soundtrack to their passion. It was tender and fierce, gentle and urgent, a physical expression of the emotional connection they had forged. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sand, Isabella's head on Jacques' chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "What happens now?" Jacques asked quietly. I must return north soon. I have commitments, contracts to fulfill. And you have your ship, your crew, your mission. Isabella was silent for a long moment, wrestling with the competing desires in her heart. Part of her wanted to abandon everything and follow Jacques into the wilderness, to leave behind the danger and the constant vigilance and simply be a woman in love. But she knew that path would destroy her. She had built something important, created a purpose that went beyond her own happiness. We live our lives, she said finally. You go north and do your work. I sail the Gulf and do mine. And when we can, we find each other again. We steal moments like this one, precious and rare. It will not be easy, Jacques. There will be long separations and constant worry. But perhaps that is the price of loving someone who refuses to be ordinary. I can accept that, Jacques said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. As long as I know you will come back to me. As long as I know that somewhere in this vast world, there is a woman who loves me as I love her. Always, Isabella promised. No matter how far I sail or how long we are apart, I will always come back to you. They spent one more week together, a stolen interlude of happiness in lives defined by hardship and danger. They explored the countryside around Mobile, rode horses along the beach, danced to fiddle music in a small tavern where no one knew their names. They talked of the future tentative plans for a life that might someday include more than brief reunions. When I have enough money saved, Jacques said one evening, I want to buy land, build a house somewhere between the wilderness and civilization. A place where we could both be ourselves, where you could have your adventures and I could have my solitude, but we would always have a home to return to. That sounds like a dream, Isabella said wistfully. A beautiful, impossible dream. Why impossible? Jacques challenged. You have already done impossible things, Isabella. You have become a legend, built a crew that is loyal unto death, changed the lives of countless people. Why should building a life together be any more impossible than what you have already accomplished? Because I have enemies, Isabella replied, her voice heavy with the weight of reality. Because there is a price on my head in 3 countries, because the life I have chosen means I may not live long enough to see that dream realized. Jacques pulled her close, his arms tight around her. Then we will make the most of whatever time we have. And I will pray every day that you stay safe, that you outsmart your enemies, that you live long enough to grow old and gray and tell our grandchildren stories of your adventures. Our grandchildren? Isabella laughed, though there were tears in her eyes. You are an optimist, Jacques Beaumont. I am a man in love, he corrected, and love makes fools and optimists of us all. The day of Jacques' departure arrived too soon. They stood on the dock in the early morning mist, the Liberté anchored nearby, and Jacques' canoe loaded with supplies for his journey north. How long until you return? Isabella asked, her hand clasped tightly in his. 6 months, perhaps 8, Jacques replied. I must reach the northern territories before the rivers freeze, complete my trading, and return before spring. But I will come back, Isabella, I swear it. And I will be here, Isabella promised. Or if not here, then I will find you. We will find each other. They kissed one last time, a kiss that held all the longing and love and fear they could not put into words. Then Jacques climbed into his canoe, took up his paddle, and began the long journey north. Isabella stood on the dock long after he had disappeared from sight, her heart aching with a bittersweet mixture of joy and sorrow. She had found love, real and true and deep. But she had also discovered a new vulnerability, a new fear. For the first time in years, she had something to lose beyond her own life. Brother Antoine found her there an hour later, still staring at the horizon. He is a good man, the priest said gently. And he loves you truly. I know, Isabella replied. That is what frightens me. Love is always frightening. Antoine said, It requires us to be vulnerable, to trust another person with our hearts, but it is also the greatest gift we can receive. Do not let fear rob you of that gift, my child. Isabella turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What if something happens to him because of me? What if my enemies use him to hurt me? What if the sun does not rise tomorrow? Antoine countered. What if the sea swallows us whole? We cannot live our lives in fear of what might happen, Isabella. We can only live each day as fully as possible and trust that God will guide us through whatever comes. Isabella nodded slowly, drawing strength from the old priest's wisdom. You are right, of course. I will not let fear control me. I will love Jacques with my whole heart and trust that we will find a way to build a life together, however unconventional it may be. That is the spirit, Antoine said with a smile. Now come. The crew is ready to sail, and there is work to be done. The world will not wait for us to sort out our hearts. As the Liberté sailed out of Mobile harbor, Isabella stood at the helm, her eyes on the horizon. Her heart was fuller than it had been in years, but also heavier. She had found love, but she had also found a new reason to survive, to be careful, to think beyond the next raid or the next adventure. Jacques Beaumont had changed her, had shown her that she could be both the fierce pirate captain and the woman who loved and was loved in return. It was a revelation that would shape everything that came after, a turning point in a life already full of transformations. The wind filled the sails, and the Liberté leaped forward across the waves. Isabella smiled, her hand resting on the wheel, her heart full of hope and determination. She would see Jacques again. She would build that impossible dream with him. But first, she had work to do. The Gulf Coast awaited, and La Capitana had promises to keep. Chapter 9. Jean Lafitte. The streets of New Orleans pulsed with life as Isabella made her way through the French Quarter on a humid November evening. The city was unlike any other place on the Gulf Coast, a heady mixture of French elegance, Spanish passion, African rhythm, and American ambition, all stirred together into something uniquely intoxicating. Music spilled from every doorway, the scent of spices and cooking food hung heavy in the air, and the babble of a dozen languages created a constant background hum. Isabella had come to New Orleans for two reasons: to sell a cargo of goods acquired from a particularly corrupt Spanish merchant, and to take the measure of Jean Lafitte, the legendary smuggler and privateer whose name was spoken with equal parts admiration and fear throughout the Gulf. She had heard the stories how Lafitte commanded a fleet of ships from his base in Barataria Bay, how he supplied half of New Orleans with smuggled goods, how he moved between the worlds of piracy and respectability with ease. She was curious to meet this man who, in many ways, was her counterpart, another outlaw who had built an empire on the margins of society. But she was also wary. Lafitte was known for his charm and his cunning, and Isabella had no intention of being drawn into his orbit or his schemes. She had dressed carefully for the evening, choosing a gown of deep green silk that was fashionable enough to pass in New Orleans society but practical enough to allow for quick movement if necessary. Her hair was arranged in an elegant style, and she wore jewelry that suggested wealth without ostentation. She looked like a prosperous merchant's wife, or perhaps a wealthy widow respectable, but not so respectable as to be boring. The tavern she sought was called Le Coq d'Or, establishment known for its excellent wine, its discreet private rooms, and its clientele of smugglers, pirates, and merchants who preferred to conduct their business away from official eyes. Isabella had learned that Lafitte frequented the place, often holding court in the back room where he played cards and made deals. She entered the tavern with confidence, her bearing that of a woman accustomed to moving in any society. The main room was crowded, with men drinking and gambling, their voices raised in argument or laughter. A few heads turned as she passed, but Isabella ignored the attention, making her way toward the back of the establishment. The private room was separated from the main tavern by a heavy curtain. Isabella paused outside, listening to the voices within. She recognized Lafitte's voice, immediately cultured, confident, with a hint of amusement that suggested he found the world and everyone in it faintly entertaining. "Gentlemen, I believe the bet is to me, Lafitte was saying. Shall we make this interesting? $500. Says I have the winning hand. Isabella pushed through the curtain and found herself in a room thick with cigar smoke. 6 men sat around a table covered in cards and money. At the head of the table sat Jean Lafitte himself, and Isabella had to admit he was impressive. He was perhaps 40 years old, with dark hair graying at the temples, sharp features, and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a coat of fine blue wool, a silk cravat, and enough jewelry to stock a small shop. He looked like a gentleman, but there was something in his eyes, a hardness, a calculation that marked him as something more dangerous. Gentlemen, Isabella said, her voice cutting through the smoke and conversation. I wonder if you might have room for one more player. The men at the table turned to stare at her, surprise evident on their faces. Women did not typically join such games, and certainly not women who looked like Isabella. Lafitte, however, merely smiled, his eyes traveling over her with frank appreciation. Madam, this is a high-stakes game. I would not want you to lose your pin money. Isabella felt a flash of irritation at the condescension in his tone, but she kept her expression pleasant. I assure you, Monsieur Lafitte, I can afford the stakes, unless, of course, you are afraid that a woman might prove a better player than you? A ripple of laughter went around the table, and Lafitte's smile widened. I am never afraid of a beautiful woman, madame. Please, join us. I am always happy to take money from someone so charming. Isabella took the empty seat across from Lafitte, noting the positions of the other players, the size of the pot, the cards that had already been played. She had learned poker from sailors and merchants across the Gulf, and she had a natural talent for reading people, for seeing the tells that gave away their hands. I am afraid you have me at a disadvantage, Lafitte said as the dealer shuffled for a new hand. You know my name, but I do not know yours. You may call me Madame Rousseau, Isabella replied, accepting her cards. I am a trader, recently arrived from Mobile. A trader, Lafitte repeated, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe her. And what does a trader trade in, Madame Rousseau? Whatever proves profitable, Isabella replied, examining her cards without expression. She had a pair of queens, a decent starting hand. I find that flexibility is the key to success in business. A philosophy I share, Lafitte said, though I confess I am curious what brings a lady trader to Lecoq d'Or. This is not the sort of establishment most respectable women frequent. Perhaps I am not a respectable woman, Isabella said lightly, placing her bet. Or perhaps I have learned that the most interesting business is conducted in places where respectable people fear to tread. The game proceeded, and Isabella quickly assessed her opponents. 2 of the men were wealthy merchants, playing for entertainment rather than profit. They bet carelessly and folded easily. 2 others were professional gamblers, skilled but predictable. The 6th man was one of Lafitte's lieutenants, clearly there to protect his master's interests. And then there was Lafitte himself. He played with the confidence of a man who was accustomed to winning, but Isabella noticed something interesting. He was more focused on reading his opponents than on his cards. He was a student of human nature, using psychology as much as skill to win his games. Isabella decided to use that against him. Over the next hour, she played carefully, winning some hands and losing others, establishing a pattern that suggested she was a competent but not exceptional player. She laughed at Lafitte's jokes, asked naive questions about the game, and generally played the role of a charming amateur who was in over her head. Lafitte, as she had expected, became increasingly confident. He began to bet more aggressively, clearly expecting to take her money before the night was through. The other players, sensing blood in the water, also increased their bets. It was nearly midnight when the hand Isabella had been waiting for finally arrived. The dealer gave her 3 aces, a powerful hand, but not unbeatable. The betting was aggressive, with Lafitte raising repeatedly. One by one, the other players folded, until only Isabella and Lafitte remained. Madame Rousseau, Lafitte said, his eyes glinting with amusement, I believe you are bluffing. You have played cautiously all evening, And now suddenly you are willing to risk everything? I think you have a mediocre hand, and are hoping I will fold. Isabella allowed a flicker of uncertainty to cross her face, as if his words had struck home. Perhaps you are right, Monsieur Lafitte. Perhaps I should fold and save my money. But you won't, Lafitte said confidently. Because you have come too far to back down now. Pride will not let you fold, even though wisdom suggests you should. He pushed a large stack of money into the center of the table. $1,000. Call or fold, madame. Isabella pretended to hesitate, her fingers drumming on the table. Then, as if making a reckless decision, she pushed her own money forward. I call. Lafitte smiled triumphantly and laid down his cards. Full house, aces over kings. I am afraid, madame, that your evening has come to an expensive end. Isabella allowed her expression to fall, as if devastated by the loss. Then, slowly, she laid down her own cards. 4 aces. I believe that beats a full house, does it not? The room fell silent. Lafitte stared at the cards, his expression frozen. Then, slowly, he began to laugh, a genuine sound of appreciation and surprise. Madame Rousseau, he said, shaking his head. You have been playing me all evening. The hesitation, the naive questions, the careful betting, all of it was designed to make me underestimate you. I am impressed and humbled, which does not happen often. Isabella gathered her winnings, her expression pleasant but not gloating. You are a skilled player, Monsieur Lafitte, but you made the mistake of assuming that because I am a woman, I must be less capable than you. It is a common error, and one I have learned to exploit. Lafitte studied her with new interest, his eyes sharp and calculating. You are no ordinary trader, are you, Madame Rousseau? Or should I say, La Capitana? Isabella felt a moment of alarm, but she kept her expression neutral. I am afraid I do not know what you mean. Come now, Lafitte said, leaning back in his chair. I make it my business to know everyone of importance in the Gulf. A woman pirate captain who robs the corrupt and helps the poor? Who commands a ship called the Liberté and has a crew that would die for her? There is only one person who fits that description. Isabella considered denying it, but she sensed that Lafitte already knew the truth. Very well. I am La Capitana, and you are Jean Lafitte, the smuggler king of Barataria. It seems we are both more than we appear. Indeed, Lafitte said, his smile returning. And now that we have established our true identities, perhaps we can speak honestly. I have a proposition for you, Captain Rousseau. I am listening, Isabella said cautiously. You and I are in similar businesses, Lafitte began. We both operate outside the law. We both have networks of contacts and resources. We both understand the value of information and timing. I propose a partnership. Together, we could control the entire Gulf Coast. We could set prices, choose our targets, eliminate our competition. We could become wealthy beyond imagination. Isabella had expected something like this. Lafitte was a businessman at heart, always looking for the next opportunity, the next advantage. But she had no interest in becoming part of his empire. It is a generous offer, she said carefully. But I must decline. Lafitte's eyebrows rose. May I ask why? Surely you see the advantages of such an arrangement. I see the advantages for you, Isabella replied. You would gain access to my crew, my contacts, my reputation. But what would I gain? The privilege of taking orders from you, of becoming a lieutenant in your organization rather than a captain of my own? You would gain wealth and security, Lafitte argued. You would have the protection of my fleet, the resources of my network. You would no longer have to risk your life on every raid. But I would lose my independence, Isabella said firmly, and that is something I will never surrender. I have spent my entire life fighting to be free, to make my own choices, to answer to no one but myself. I will not trade that freedom for gold or security or any other inducement you might offer. Lafitte studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. I understand. and I respect your decision, even if I think it is a mistake. You are a remarkable woman, Captain Rousseau. Stubborn, proud, and far too independent for your own good. But remarkable nonetheless. I will take that as a compliment, Isabella said, rising from her chair. And now, if you will excuse me, I have business to attend to. One moment, Lafitte said, also standing. I want you to know that my offer stands, should you ever change your mind. And I want you to know that I will not be your enemy, even if you will not be my partner. There is room enough in the Gulf for both of us, as long as we respect each other's territories. Agreed, Isabella said, extending her hand. I have no desire to make an enemy of Jean Lafitte, but neither will I be his subordinate. They shook hands, two legends of the Gulf Coast acknowledging each other as equals. As Isabella left the tavern, she felt a sense of satisfaction. She had met Jean Lafitte, taken his measure, and proven that she was his equal, perhaps even his superior in some ways. She had also won a substantial amount of money, which would help fund her operations for months to come. But more importantly, she had maintained her independence, her freedom to chart her own course. As she walked through the streets of New Orleans, the night air cool on her face, Isabella thought of Jacques, far away in the northern territories. She thought of her crew, waiting for her return. She thought of the villages and settlements that depended on her, the people who looked to La Capitana as a symbol of hope. She had built something important, something that mattered, and she would not surrender it to anyone, no matter how powerful or persuasive they might be. The legend of La Capitana would continue to grow, but it would grow on her terms, according to her vision. She was the master of her own destiny, the captain of her own ship, the author of her own story, and that was worth more than all the gold in Jean Lafitte's treasury. Chapter 10. The Bounty. The winter of 1814 brought dark clouds to Isabella's horizon, both literal and metaphorical. The Liberté cut through choppy waters off the coast of Pensacola, her crew tense and watchful. Word had reached them 3 days earlier. The Spanish colonial government, tired of Isabella's interference with their corrupt officials and merchants, had placed a bounty on her head, 10,000 pesos, dead or alive. It was a staggering sum, enough to tempt even loyal men to betrayal. Isabella stood at the helm, her eyes scanning the horizon, her mind working through the implications. She had made enemies before it was an inevitable consequence of her chosen life, but this was different. This was official, sanctioned, a declaration that she was now a priority target for every bounty hunter, naval officer, and opportunistic pirate in the Gulf. Captain, Miguel said, approaching with a worried expression. The crew is uneasy. 10,000 pesos is more money than most of them will see in a lifetime. They're wondering if someone might be tempted. Are you tempted, Miguel? Isabella asked, her voice calm but her eyes sharp. Never, Miguel replied without hesitation. You saved my life, gave me purpose when I had none. I would die before I betrayed you. But not everyone on this ship has the same history with you. Some of the newer crew members. I understand, Isabella said. Gather everyone on deck. It's time we address this directly. Within minutes, the entire crew had assembled. Isabella looked out at the faces before her, some she had known for years, others who had joined more recently. She saw loyalty in many eyes, but also uncertainty, fear, and in a few cases, calculation. You have all heard about the bounty, Isabella began, her voice carrying across the deck. 10,000 pesos for my capture or death. It is a fortune, more than enough to set a man up for life. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not insult your intelligence by claiming the money means nothing. She paused, letting her words sink in. But I want you to understand what that bounty represents. It is not just a price on my head, it is a declaration of war against everything we have built together. The Spanish authorities want me dead because I have interfered with their corruption, because I have helped people they would prefer to keep powerless and exploited. They want me dead because I represent a threat to their system of oppression. Isabella's voice grew stronger, more passionate. If you betray me for that money, you are not just betraying one woman. You are betraying every village we have helped, every family we have fed, every person we have freed from bondage. You are saying that gold is more important than justice, that personal gain is more valuable than the bonds we have forged together. She looked around the deck, meeting each person's eyes in turn. I will not force anyone to stay. If you want to leave, if the risk is too great or the temptation too strong, you may take a boat and go. I will give you provisions and wish you well. But if you stay, I need to know that you are committed not just to me, but to what we represent, to the cause we serve. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thomas, the former slave Isabella had freed, stepped forward. "Captain," he said, his deep voice resonant with emotion. "Before I met you, I was property. I was a thing to be bought and sold, worked until I died. You gave me back my humanity. You gave me freedom and dignity and purpose. No amount of money could make me betray that. I stand with you, now and always." One by one, others stepped forward. Miguel, of course, and Brother Antoine, Zara, the fierce woman who had become Isabella's closest friend, old Henri, who had been with her since the beginning. Even some of the newer crew members, moved by Thomas's words and Isabella's passion, declared their loyalty. But 3 men remained silent, standing apart from the others. Isabella noted their faces, filed away their names. She would watch them carefully in the days to come. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice thick with emotion. "You honor me with your loyalty, and I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to keep us safe, to outsmart our enemies, to ensure that we all survive to see the day when we can retire from this life, with our heads held high and our consciences clear." The crew dispersed, returning to their duties with renewed purpose. But Isabella knew the danger was far from over. The bounty would attract attention from every corner of the Gulf, and she would need to be more careful than ever. Her instincts proved correct. Over the following weeks, the Liberté encountered increased naval patrols. Spanish warships that had previously ignored pirate activity now actively hunted for Isabella's ship. Twice they had to outrun pursuers, using Isabella's superior knowledge of the coastal waters to escape into shallow channels where larger vessels could not follow. But it was not the Spanish that posed the greatest threat. It was a British naval officer named Captain Reginald Blackthorne. Isabella first heard his name in a tavern in Biloxi, where she had gone to meet with a contact who supplied information about Spanish shipping schedules. The contact, a nervous merchant named Dubois, was pale and sweating when she arrived. "Captain Rousseau," he said, his voice shaking. "I have the information you requested, but I must warn you there is a British officer asking questions about you. He arrived 2 days ago, and he is different from the others." "Different how?" Isabella asked, her senses alert. "He is obsessed," Dubois replied. "He speaks of you constantly, studies maps of your known routes, interviews anyone who has seen you. He has offered his own money, £1,000, to anyone who can provide information leading to your capture. And there is something in his eyes, Captain, something cold and cruel. This is not just duty for him. This is personal." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. Why would a British officer have a personal vendetta against me? "I have never even encountered the British Navy." "I do not know," Dubois said. "But I would be very careful, Captain. This man is dangerous." Isabella learned more about Captain Blackthorne over the following days. He commanded a frigate called HMS Retribution, a fast, well-armed vessel with a crew of experienced sailors. He was known for his ruthlessness, his willingness to bend or break rules to achieve his objectives, and he had a reputation for holding grudges. But why did he hate her? Isabella could not understand it until Brother Antoine, using his connections within the church, uncovered the truth. "His brother," Antoine said quietly, showing Isabella a letter he had received from a priest in Jamaica. Captain Blackthorne's younger brother was a merchant captain. 3 years ago, his ship was captured by pirates off the coast of Cuba. The pirates killed everyone aboard, including Blackthorn's brother. Since then, Blackthorn has made it his mission to hunt down and destroy every pirate in the Caribbean and the Gulf. But I had nothing to do with his brother's death, Isabella protested. I wasn't even operating in those waters 3 years ago. It doesn't matter, Antoine replied. To Blackthorn, all pirates are the same. You are simply the most famous, the most successful, and therefore the most satisfying target. He wants to make an example of you, to prove that no pirate is beyond his reach. Isabella felt anger rising in her chest. So I am to be punished for crimes I did not commit, hunted by a man who cannot distinguish between justice and revenge? I am afraid so, Antoine said sadly, and I fear he will not stop until one of you is dead. The first encounter with Blackthorn came on a gray morning in early February. The Liberté was sailing north along the coast when the lookout spotted a sail on the horizon. As the ship drew closer, Isabella recognized the British naval ensign. "Battle stations," she ordered, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Prepare to run. We cannot fight a British frigate head-on." But as the Liberté turned to flee, 2 more sails appeared, one to the north, one to the south. Blackthorn had laid a trap, using his ship and 2 others to create a net that was rapidly closing around Isabella's vessel. "He's good," Miguel muttered, studying the positions of the British ships. "He's anticipated our escape routes." "Then we'll have to do something he doesn't anticipate," Isabella replied. She studied the coastline, her mind racing. There, a narrow channel between 2 islands, barely wide enough for the Liberté to pass through. The British frigates, with their deeper drafts, would never make it. "Hard to starboard," Isabella commanded. "Make for that channel. Full sail." The Liberté leaped forward, her crew working with practiced efficiency. The British ships adjusted their courses, trying to cut off Isabella's escape, but she had the angle. The Liberté shot into the channel with yards to spare, her keel scraping bottom in places, but she made it through. The British ships were forced to sail around the islands, losing precious time. By the time they emerged on the other side, the Liberté had disappeared into a maze of small islands and sandbars that Isabella knew intimately. But Isabella knew this was only the first encounter. Blackthorn would not give up so easily. He would study her tactics, learn from his mistakes, and come at her again with a better plan. The cat-and-mouse game continued for weeks. Blackthorn seemed to be everywhere, appearing when Isabella least expected it, forcing her to constantly change her plans and routes. He was smart, patient, and utterly relentless. The strain began to show on Isabella and her crew. They were constantly on edge, unable to rest, always looking over their shoulders. The raids that had been their livelihood became too dangerous to attempt. They were being hunted, and the hunter was closing in. One night, as Isabella stood alone at the helm under a sky full of stars, Brother Antoine joined her. "You cannot keep running forever," he said gently. "Eventually, you will have to face him." "I know," Isabella replied, "but not yet. Not until I have a plan, an advantage. Blackthorn has superior firepower and more ships. If I face him now, I will lose." "Then what will you do?" Isabella was silent for a long moment, her eyes on the horizon. "I will do what I have always done, Antoine. I will survive. I will adapt. I will find a way to turn his strength against him. But I need time to think, to plan." "Time is a luxury you may not have," Antoine warned. "The bounty, Blackthorn's obsession, the increased naval patrols, all of it is closing in around you like a noose. You need to act soon, or you may not get another chance." Isabella knew he was right. The walls were closing in, and she needed to find a way out before they crushed her completely. But what? How could she defeat an enemy with superior resources and an obsessive determination to see her dead? The answer, when it came, would require all of her courage, all of her cunning, and all of the loyalty her crew had pledged to her. But first, she would face a betrayal that would shake her to her core and test the bonds she had worked so hard to forge. The storm was coming, and Isabella could only hope she would be strong enough to weather it. Chapter 11. The Viper's Nest. The betrayal came on a moonless night in late October, though Isabella had felt its shadow for weeks. It started with small things. A merchant vessel that should have been an easy prize somehow knew they were coming, its cargo already offloaded and its crew armed and waiting. A patrol ship that appeared exactly where the Liberté had planned to anchor for repairs. A Spanish customs official in Pensacola who seemed to know her crew's movements before they made them. At first, Isabella attributed it to bad luck or her own growing reputation. La Capitana was famous, now perhaps too famous. It made sense that her enemies would be more vigilant, more prepared. But then came the ambush at Cat Island. They had sailed there to careen the ship, to scrape the barnacles from her hull in a secluded cove that only a handful of people knew about. Isabella had been careful, telling her crew the destination only hours before they arrived. Yet when they rounded the point, 3 British patrol boats were waiting, positioned perfectly to cut off any escape. Only Miguel's quick thinking and a sudden squall had saved them, allowing the Liberté to slip away in the confusion of wind and rain. But as Isabella stood at the wheel, water streaming down her face, she felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Someone was talking. Someone aboard her ship was feeding information to her enemies. The thought made her physically ill. These people were her family. She had fought beside them, bled with them, shared her fortune with them. The idea that one of them could betray that trust felt like a knife between her ribs, but she couldn't ignore the evidence. And she couldn't let sentiment cloud her judgment. "Miguel," she said quietly that night, after they had anchored in a different cove, one she chose at random. "We need to talk." They met in her cabin, along with Zara and Cutler Morrison. Isabella trusted these 3 with her life had trusted them since the beginning. If there was a traitor aboard, it wasn't one of them. "You've noticed it too," Miguel said. It wasn't a question. Isabella nodded. "The timing is too perfect. The British are always one step ahead. Someone is telling them where we'll be." "Who?" Cutler asked, his weathered face grim. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's what we need to find out." Isabella spread a map on her table, marking the locations of their recent encounters. "Look at the pattern. Every time we've been intercepted, it's been after we've discussed our plans with the full crew." Zara leaned forward, studying the map. "But we always discuss plans with the full crew. That's how you've always done things. No secrets. Everyone has a voice." "I know." Isabella felt the weight of that decision now. Her democratic approach, her insistence on transparency, had made them vulnerable. "But we can't continue like this. If we don't find the traitor, someone is going to die." "So what do we do?" Miguel asked. Isabella thought for a moment, then said, "We set a trap. Tomorrow, I'll announce to the crew that we're heading to Ship Island to raid a merchant convoy. I'll make it sound like valuable cargo, something we can't pass up, but we won't actually go there. And if someone tips off the British, they'll be waiting at Ship Island while we're somewhere else," Cutler finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly. But we need to watch the crew carefully. If someone tries to send a message, we need to catch them in the act." They agreed to take turns keeping watch, rotating so that someone was always observing the crew without being obvious about it. Isabella hated the necessity of it, hated that she had to spy on her own people, but she saw no other choice. The next morning, she gathered everyone on deck and announced the plan, making sure to include specific details about timing and location. She watched faces as she spoke, looking for any sign of guilt or nervousness, but saw nothing suspicious. Her crew looked eager, excited at the prospect of a rich prize. If one of them was a traitor, they were good at hiding it. For 2 days, nothing happened. The Liberté sailed south, ostensibly toward Ship Island, while Isabella and her trusted officers kept careful watch. The crew went about their duties normally. No one tried to leave the ship or send any signals. Isabella began to wonder if she had been wrong, if the pattern of interceptions really was just bad luck, or her enemies' growing competence. Then, on the 3rd night, Zara woke her with an urgent whisper. "Isabella, come quickly. Don't make a sound." Isabella dressed quickly and followed Zara up to the deck. The night was dark, the moon hidden behind clouds. Zara led her to the stern, where they crouched behind a coil of rope. "There," Zara breathed, pointing. Isabella followed her gaze and saw a figure standing at the rail, barely visible in the darkness. As her eyes adjusted, she recognized the build, the stance. Thomas Reed. He was one of the original crew members, one of the men who had accepted her as captain after the battle with the French warship. He was a competent sailor, quiet but reliable. She had never had cause to doubt him. As they watched, Thomas pulled something from his coat, a small lantern with a shutter. He opened and closed the shutter in a deliberate pattern, sending flashes of light out across the dark water, signaling. Isabella felt her heart turn to ice. She wanted to rush forward, to confront him immediately, but she forced herself to wait. She needed to see if anyone signaled back, needed to confirm what she was seeing. After a moment, an answering light flashed from the darkness, once, twice, 3 times. A ship was out there, close enough to see Thomas's signal, but far enough away to remain hidden. British, almost certainly. Following them, waiting for information about where they would strike next. "Get Miguel and Cutler," Isabella whispered to Zara. "Quietly. Bring them to my cabin." Zara slipped away like a shadow. Isabella remained where she was, watching Thomas complete his signal and then carefully hide the lantern back in his coat. He stood at the rail for a moment longer, then made his way below deck, presumably to his hammock. Isabella waited until he was gone, then made her way to her cabin. Her hands were shaking not with fear, but with a cold, terrible anger. How long had this been going on? How many close calls, how many dangers had been caused by Thomas's betrayal? Had he been working for the British from the beginning, or had they turned him somewhere along the way? And why? What could they have offered him that was worth betraying his shipmates? Miguel and Cutler arrived within minutes, followed by Zara. Isabella told them what she had seen. "Thomas Reed," Cutler said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I would have sworn he was loyal." "So would I," Isabella said bitterly. "But we all saw what we saw. The question now is what to do about it." "Kill him," Miguel said flatly. "He's a traitor. The penalty for that is death." Isabella had expected this response. By the laws of the sea, Miguel was right. Traitors were executed, usually by hanging or by being thrown overboard. It was the only way to maintain discipline, to show the crew that betrayal would not be tolerated. But the thought of ordering Thomas's death made her feel sick. "There's another option," she said slowly. "We could maroon him, put him ashore with minimal supplies, and let him fend for himself." "That's almost worse than killing him," Cutler pointed out. "At least death is quick." "But it's not murder," Isabella said. "And it sends a message that I won't tolerate betrayal, but I'm not a butcher either." "The crew might see it as weakness," Miguel warned. "Then I'll have to make them understand that it's not." Isabella stood, her decision made. "We'll confront him in the morning, in front of everyone. He'll have a chance to explain himself. Then we'll put it to a vote." "A vote?" Miguel looked skeptical. "Isabella, you're the captain. This is your decision to make. And I'm making the decision to let the crew have a voice," Isabella said firmly. "They're the ones he betrayed. They should have a say in his punishment." She could see that Miguel disagreed, but he nodded. "As you wish, Captain." The rest of the night passed slowly. Isabella tried to sleep, but couldn't. She kept seeing Thomas's face, remembering conversations they'd had, times he'd stood watch beside her, or helped repair the rigging after a storm. Had it all been a lie? Had he been laughing at her the whole time, feeding information to her enemies while pretending to be her loyal crew member? The thought made her want to scream. When dawn finally came, Isabella gathered the entire crew on deck. Thomas stood among them, looking curious but not alarmed. He had no idea he'd been caught. "We have a traitor aboard this ship," Isabella announced, her voice carrying across the deck. The crew stirred, murmuring in shock and anger. For weeks now, someone has been feeding information to the British, telling them where we'll be and what we're planning. That's why we've had so many close calls lately. That's why our enemies always seem to be one step ahead. The murmuring grew louder. Isabella held up her hand for silence. Last night, I saw this traitor signaling to a British ship that's been following us. I saw him with my own eyes, sending coded messages with a lantern. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then she pointed directly at Thomas Reed. The traitor is Thomas Reed. The deck erupted in shouts and curses. Thomas's face went white, then red. He started to speak, but Cutler and Miguel had already moved to flank him, preventing any attempt to escape. "That's a lie," Thomas shouted. "Captain, I swear, I would never." "I saw you," Isabella said coldly. "Last night, at the stern rail, you had a shutter lantern. You sent a signal, and someone signaled back. Don't insult me by denying it." Thomas's mouth opened and closed. For a moment, Isabella thought he might continue to protest his innocence. Then something in his face changed a kind of resignation, or perhaps relief that the pretense was finally over. "How long?" Isabella asked. "How long have you been working for them?" Thomas was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Since Havana. 3 months ago." 3 months. Isabella felt the words like a physical blow. 3 months of betrayal, of lies, of putting her crew in danger. "Why?" she asked, and hated how her voice shook. "What did they offer you?" "A pardon," Thomas said quietly, "and gold. Enough gold to buy a farm in Virginia, to live like a gentleman instead of a hunted criminal." He looked around at the angry faces surrounding him. "I'm tired, Captain. Tired of running. Tired of looking over my shoulder. Tired of knowing that any day could be my last. The British offered me a way out." "So you sold us?" Isabella said. "You sold your shipmates, people who trusted you, who fought beside you, for gold and a pardon. I didn't think anyone would get hurt," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I just told them where we'd be. I thought they'd just avoid us, or maybe capture the ship without a fight." "You thought wrong," Miguel snarled. "We could have died at Cat Island, all of us, because of you." The crew was shouting now, calling for Thomas's blood. Several men had drawn their knives. Isabella could see the fear in Thomas's eyes as he realized how close he was to being torn apart. "Silence," Isabella commanded, and the authority in her voice cut through the chaos. "Thomas Reed has betrayed us. The penalty for that, by the laws of the sea, is death." Thomas closed his eyes, his face pale. "However," Isabella continued, "I am not going to order his execution." The crew erupted again, this time in confusion and protest. Isabella raised her voice. "I will not become the kind of captain who kills her own crew, even when they deserve it. Thomas Reed will be marooned. We'll put him ashore on the nearest island with a knife, a waterskin, and enough food for 3 days. After that, his survival is in God's hands and his own." "That's too merciful," someone shouted. "That's my decision," Isabella said firmly. "But I want the crew to vote on it. If the majority wants him hanged, then hanged he'll be. But I'm asking you to show mercy. Not for his sake, he doesn't deserve mercy, but for ours, so we can look at ourselves in the mirror and know we're better than the people who hunt us." She looked around at her crew, meeting their eyes one by one. "We're not murderers. We're not butchers. We take from the rich and give to the poor. We fight when we have to, but we don't kill in cold blood. If we execute Thomas, we become no better than the British captains who hang pirates without trial. Is that who we want to be?" The deck was silent now. Isabella could see the crew thinking, weighing her words against their anger. "All in favor of marooning Thomas Reed, raise your hands," she said. Slowly, hands began to rise. Zara's first, then Cutler's, then Miguel's, though Miguel looked unhappy about it. More hands followed, until nearly 2/3 of the crew had voted for mercy. "All in favor of hanging," Isabella said. The remaining hands went up, but they were clearly in the minority. "The crew has spoken," Isabella said. "Thomas Reed will be marooned. Miguel, Cutler, take him below and keep him under guard until we reach land. As they led Thomas away, he looked back at Isabella. Thank you, he said quietly. Isabella didn't respond. She felt no satisfaction in her mercy, no sense of righteousness. She just felt tired and betrayed and sad. That afternoon, they spotted a small island, little more than a sandbar with some scrubby vegetation and a freshwater spring. It was inhabited, Isabella knew, by a few families of fishermen. Thomas wouldn't die there, but he wouldn't live comfortably either. They rowed him ashore in the longboat. Isabella went with them, wanting to see this through to the end. On the beach, Thomas stood with his meager supplies, a knife, a water skin, a small sack of dried fish, and hardtack. He looked small and pathetic, nothing like the confident sailor who had once stood watch beside her. I'm sorry, he said to Isabella. For what it's worth, I am sorry. So am I, Isabella said. Sorry that you threw away something valuable for something worthless. The British won't honor their promises, Thomas. You know that, don't you? Once you're no longer useful to them, they'll hang you just like any other pirate. Thomas's face suggested he had already realized this. You could have had a family here, Isabella continued. With us, you could have been part of something that mattered. Instead, you chose gold and false promises. She turned to leave, then paused. If you survive, if you make it back to civilization, tell them this. La Capitana showed you mercy when she could have killed you. Tell them she's not the monster they think she is. Maybe it won't matter, but maybe, someday, it will. They rowed back to the Liberté in silence. As they pulled away from the island, Isabella looked back once and saw Thomas standing on the beach, watching them go. Then she turned her face forward and didn't look back again. That night, she called another meeting in her cabin with Miguel, Zara, and Cutler. We need to change how we operate, she said. No more announcing our plans to the full crew until the last possible moment. No more democratic decisions about where we sail or what we target. That's going to cause resentment, Cutler warned. I know, but it's necessary. We can't risk another betrayal. Isabella rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of command pressing down on her. I wanted to be different. I wanted to prove that a crew could be run with trust and respect instead of fear. But maybe I was naive. You weren't naive, Zara said gently. You were hopeful. There's a difference. Hopeful, Isabella repeated. And where did that hope get us? We nearly died at Cat Island because I trusted the wrong person. You trusted everyone, Miguel said. That's not a weakness, Isabella. That's what makes you a good captain. Thomas Reed betrayed that trust, but that's on him, not you. Isabella wanted to believe that, but as she lay in her hammock that night, listening to the creaking of the ship and the whisper of the waves, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had lost something on that beach, not just a crew member, but a piece of her innocence. The belief that loyalty and fairness would be enough to keep her people safe. The world was darker than she had wanted to believe, and if she was going to survive in it, if she was going to protect the people she loved, she would have to be harder, more careful, more suspicious. The thought made her unutterably sad. But as dawn broke over the Gulf of Mexico, and the Liberté sailed on toward whatever future awaited them, Isabella made herself a promise. She would learn from this betrayal. She would be wiser, more cautious. But she would not let it make her cruel. She would find a way to be both strong and merciful, both careful and trusting. It would be a difficult balance, perhaps an impossible one, but then again, she had done impossible things before. And she would do them again. Chapter 12. The Capture. 3 weeks after Thomas Reed's banishment, Isabella's crew had made remarkable progress. They had acquired a small sloop, nothing like the Liberté, but seaworthy and fast through a combination of careful negotiation and strategic borrowing from a corrupt merchant who owed them a debt. They had restocked their supplies, re-established contact with their allies, and begun planning their next move. Isabella had decided that the best way to deal with Blackthorn was to go on the offensive. She would not hide in the swamps forever. waiting for him to find her. Instead, she would strike at his supply lines, harass his patrols, and make him understand that hunting La Capitana came with a price. But she needed more information about Blackthorn's operations, his ship movements, his supply schedules, and for that, she needed someone to venture into Mobile and make discreet inquiries. Antoine volunteered immediately. "I can do it, Isabella. I know the city. I know how to blend in. Let me help." Isabella hesitated. Antoine was her brother, the last of her family. The thought of sending him into danger made her stomach clench with fear. But she also knew he was right. He was capable, clever, and determined, and she couldn't protect him forever. "All right," she said finally. "But you take 2 others with you, Miguel and Tomas. You stay together, you keep your heads down, and you're back here by sunset tomorrow. No heroics, Antoine, just information." He grinned, that familiar boyish smile that reminded her of their childhood in Boyuo La Batre. "No heroics, I promise." They left at dawn, taking the small rowboat they used for supply runs. Isabella watched them go, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Zara came to stand beside her. "He'll be fine," Zara said gently. "Antoine is smart, and he has good men with him." "I know," Isabella replied. "But I can't shake this feeling that something is wrong." "You've been through a lot these past weeks," Zara said. "It's natural to be worried. But you have to trust your crew. Trust your brother. You can't carry every burden yourself." Isabella nodded, but the unease remained. The day passed slowly. Isabella threw herself into work, helping to repair the sloop's rigging, reviewing maps with Miguel's second-in-command, and planning potential routes for their next raid. But her mind kept drifting back to Antoine, wondering if he was safe, if he had found the information they needed. Sunset came and went. Antoine did not return. By the time full darkness had fallen, Isabella's worry had transformed into cold dread. She stood at the edge of the camp, staring out into the swamp, willing her brother to appear. Miguel approached, his face grave. "Captain, they should have been back hours ago." "I know," Isabella said tightly. "Should we send a search party?" Isabella considered this. A search party might find Antoine, but it might also lead Blackthorn's men straight back to their camp. She couldn't risk the entire crew for 3 men, no matter how much she wanted to. "Not yet," she said. "We wait until morning. If they haven't returned by then, I'll go myself." But morning brought worse news than silence. A small fishing boat approached the camp, and its occupant, a grizzled old fisherman named Caleb, who had helped them before, carried a message. "Captain," he said, his voice heavy with sympathy, "I'm sorry to bring you this news. Your brother and his companions were captured yesterday afternoon. British sailors, led by Captain Blackthorn himself. They're being held on his flagship, the Retribution." Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Captured," she whispered. "How?" "From what I heard, they were asking questions in a tavern. Someone recognized them, or maybe someone informed on them. Blackthorn's men surrounded the place. There was a fight. Your brother and his men fought bravely, but they were outnumbered. They're alive, Captain, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Isabella demanded. "Blackthorn is saying they'll hang as pirates. He's planning a public execution in 3 days' time. He's using them as bait, Captain. He wants you to try to rescue them." Isabella's hands clenched into fists. "Of course he does. He knows I won't abandon my brother." Zara had come to stand beside her, and now she placed a hand on Isabella's arm. "Child, you can't walk into his trap. That's exactly what he wants." "I know what he wants," Isabella said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. "But I can't let Antoine die. He's my brother, Zara. He's all I have left of my family." "He's not all you have," Zara said firmly. "You have us. You have this crew, this family you've built. And we won't let you throw your life away on a suicide mission." "Then what do you suggest?" Isabella asked, tears streaming down her face. "That I abandon him? That I let him hang while I hide in the swamp like a coward?" "No," Miguel said, stepping forward. We suggest you do what you do best, Captain. We suggest you outsmart Blackthorn. You've outmaneuvered every enemy you've ever faced. This time will be no different. Isabella wiped her eyes, forcing herself to think clearly. Miguel was right. Rushing in blindly would only get them all killed. She needed a plan, a clever plan, something Blackthorn wouldn't expect. Tell me everything you know, she said to Caleb. Where are they being held? How many guards? What are the security measures? Caleb shared what information he had gathered. Antoine and the others were being held in the brig of the Retribution, which was anchored in Mobile Bay. The ship was heavily guarded, with sentries posted day and night. Blackthorn himself was staying aboard, personally overseeing the prisoners. The execution was scheduled for 3 days hence, at noon, in the public square. Blackthorn planned to make a spectacle of it, to show the people of Mobile what happened to pirates. As Caleb spoke, an idea began to form in Isabella's mind. It was audacious, dangerous, and required perfect timing. But it might just work. Thank you, Caleb, she said, pressing a small pouch of coins into his hand. You've been a good friend to us. After he left, Isabella gathered her crew. I have a plan, she announced. It's risky, and it requires some of us to walk directly into the lion's den. But I believe it can work. She outlined her strategy, and as she spoke, she saw understanding dawn on her crew's faces. It was bold, perhaps even mad, but it was also brilliant. I'll need volunteers, Isabella said. This is dangerous, and I won't order anyone to come with me. Every hand went up. Isabella felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, love, and fierce determination. Thank you, she said, her voice thick. Thank you all, but I can only take a few. The rest of you will have your own crucial roles to play. She spent the rest of the day preparing, going over every detail of the plan, making sure everyone understood their part. As night fell, she found herself alone in her shelter, staring at a small wooden carving Antoine had made for her years ago, a tiny ship, crude but lovingly crafted. I'm coming for you, little brother, she whispered. I promise. Zara entered without knocking, carrying 2 cups of tea. She handed one to Isabella and sat down beside her. You're blaming yourself, Zara said. It wasn't a question. I sent him, Isabella replied. I knew it was dangerous, and I sent him anyway. He volunteered, Zara reminded her. Antoine is a grown man, Isabella. He made his own choice. He's my responsibility. They all are. Yes, Zara agreed. But that doesn't mean you can control everything. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, things go wrong. What matters is how we respond. Isabella took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through her. I'm scared, Zara. What if I can't save him? What if my plan fails and I lose him forever? Then you will grieve, Zara said simply. And then you will continue, because that's what survivors do. But I don't think it will come to that. I've watched you for years now, child. I've seen you face impossible odds and emerge victorious. I believe in you. Your crew believes in you. And I think, deep down, you believe in yourself, too. Isabella met Zara's eyes, drawing strength from the older woman's unwavering faith. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For believing in me when I was just a frightened girl. For standing by me through everything. You were never just a frightened girl, Zara said with a smile. You were always La Capitana. You just needed time to grow into it. That night, Isabella barely slept. She went over the plan again and again, looking for flaws, considering contingencies. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted but resolute. It was time to save her brother. Chapter 13. The rescue. The transformation took hours. Isabella stood in the small room of a sympathetic merchant's house in Mobile, barely recognizing herself in the mirror. Gone were the practical trousers and loose shirt of a pirate captain. In their place, she wore an elaborate gown of deep blue silk, with a tightly laced corset and layers of petticoats. Her dark hair, usually tied back in a simple braid, had been arranged in an elegant style, with curls framing her face. Powder lightened her sun-bronzed skin, and rouge colored her cheeks and lips. "You look like a proper Spanish lady," Zara said, adjusting the lace mantilla that covered Isabella's hair. "Doña Isabella Velázquez, wife of a wealthy merchant from Pensacola." "I can barely breathe in this corset," Isabella muttered. "How do women wear these things?" "Very carefully," Zara replied with a slight smile. "Now remember, you must move differently. Smaller steps, more graceful. Keep your eyes downcast when speaking to men. You are a respectable lady, modest and refined." Isabella practiced walking across the room, adjusting to the restrictive clothing. It felt like wearing chains, but she understood the necessity. No one would suspect a wealthy Spanish lady of being the notorious pirate captain La Capitana. Miguel entered, dressed in the livery of a servant. He too looked uncomfortable in his costume, but he played his part well, bowing respectfully to Isabella. "Doña Velázquez," he said in Spanish, "your carriage is ready." The plan was simple in concept, but complex in execution. Isabella, disguised as Doña Isabella Velázquez, would present herself at the harbor master's office with a letter of introduction, expertly forged by one of their crew who had once been a clerk. She would claim that her husband, a merchant with business connections to the British Crown, had sent her to Mobile to discuss potential trade agreements. She would request a tour of the British naval facilities, including the Retribution, expressing her husband's interest in the Royal Navy's operations in the Gulf. It was audacious, but Isabella was counting on British officers' tendency to underestimate women. They would see a wealthy, beautiful lady and never imagine she was a pirate captain planning a rescue. The carriage borrowed from their merchant ally rolled through the streets of Mobile. Isabella sat stiffly, her heart pounding beneath the layers of silk and lace. Beside her, Zara played the role of her lady's maid, while Miguel sat up front with the driver. At the harbor master's office, Isabella was received with the courtesy due to a woman of her supposed station. The harbor master himself, a portly man named Whitmore, bowed over her hand. "Doña Velázquez, what an unexpected pleasure. How may I be of service?" Isabella spoke in Spanish-accented English, her voice soft and refined. "Señor Whitmore, my husband, Don Carlos Velázquez, has sent me to Mobile to explore potential business opportunities. He has great respect for the British Royal Navy and wishes to establish trade connections. I was hoping you might arrange for me to tour your naval facilities so that I might report back to him on the impressive operations here." Whitmore preened at the flattery. Of course. It would be my honor. In fact, Captain Blackthorne of the Retribution is currently in port. I'm sure he would be delighted to show you his ship. It's one of the finest vessels in His Majesty's fleet." Isabella's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression pleasantly interested. "That would be wonderful, Señor Whitmore. My husband will be most pleased." Within the hour, Isabella found herself being rowed out to the Retribution in the harbor master's personal boat. Zara and Miguel accompanied her, maintaining their roles as servants. As they approached the massive warship, Isabella studied it carefully, noting the positions of the cannons, the number of sailors on deck, the location of the brig. Captain Blackthorne himself was waiting to receive her. He was a tall man in his 40s, with graying hair and cold blue eyes. Isabella recognized him from the descriptions her crew had provided. This was the man who had hunted her relentlessly, who had captured her brother, who planned to hang Antoine as bait to draw her out. She curtsied gracefully, keeping her eyes modestly lowered. "Captain Blackthorne, it is an honor to meet you. I have heard much about your distinguished service." Blackthorne bowed. "The honor is mine, Doña Velázquez. It's not often we have such lovely visitors aboard the Retribution. Please, allow me to show you our ship." As Blackthorne led her on a tour, Isabella played her part perfectly. She exclaimed over the ship's cannons, asked naive questions about naval operations, and fluttered her fan when the captain explained battle tactics. All the while, her sharp eyes were taking in every detail, mapping the ship's layout in her mind. "Captain," she said as they walked along the main deck. "I have heard rumors of pirates in these waters. Is it true that you recently captured some of these criminals?" Blackthorn's expression darkened with satisfaction. "Indeed, Doña Velázquez. Just days ago, we captured 3 members of the notorious pirate crew, led by the woman who calls herself La Capitana. They are currently in our brig, awaiting execution." Isabella's hand went to her throat in a gesture of delicate horror. "How dreadful. A woman pirate? I can scarcely believe such a creature exists." "Oh, she exists," Blackthorn said grimly. "And she's as dangerous as any man, but her days are numbered. I'm using her crew members as bait. When she comes to rescue them, and she will come, I'm certain of it. I'll be ready. La Capitana will finally face justice." "How clever of you, Captain," Isabella murmured. Might I see these pirates? I confess, I have never seen a real criminal before. It would be quite thrilling, in a safe way, of course." Blackthorn hesitated, then smiled indulgently. "I don't see why not. They're securely locked up, and you'll be perfectly safe. This way, Doña Velázquez." He led her below decks, through narrow corridors lit by swinging lanterns. Isabella's heart raced as they approached the brig. 2 armed guards stood at attention outside the heavy wooden door. "Open it," Blackthorn commanded. The guards unlocked the door, and Isabella stepped into the dim space beyond. 3 men sat in the cell, their hands and feet shackled. Antoine looked up, and Isabella saw the moment of recognition flash in his eyes. But he was smart enough to show no reaction, merely staring at her with the same dull resignation as his companions. "These are the pirates," Blackthorn said, with satisfaction. "They'll hang in 2 days' time, in the public square. It will be quite a spectacle." Isabella studied the prisoners, her mind racing. The cell was secured with a heavy iron lock. The guards were alert and well armed. A direct assault would be suicide. But she hadn't come here to fight. She had come to gather information, to learn the layout of the ship, to find the weaknesses in Blackthorn's security. "They look so ordinary," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I expected pirates to be more fearsome." "They're dangerous enough," Blackthorn assured her, "but they're also cowards. They beg for mercy. They plead for their lives. It's pathetic, really." Isabella saw Antoine's jaw tighten at this insult, but he remained silent. Good. He understood that any reaction could give them away. "I've seen enough," Isabella said, turning away. "Thank you for indulging my curiosity, Captain. Shall we return to the deck? I find the air down here rather oppressive." "Of course, Doña Velázquez." As they climbed back up to the main deck, Isabella's mind was already working through the next phase of her plan. She had seen where Antoine was being held. She had observed the guard rotations, the ship's layout, the security measures. Now she needed to create an opportunity for rescue. Back on deck, Isabella thanked Captain Blackthorn profusely for the tour. "My husband will be so impressed when I tell him about the Retribution and its distinguished captain. Perhaps, Captain, you would do us the honor of dining with us this evening? We are staying at the Merchant's Inn, and I would love to hear more about your adventures." Blackthorn looked pleased. "I would be delighted, Doña Velázquez." "Wonderful. Shall we say 8 o'clock? After arranging the details, Isabella returned to the harbormaster's boat. Only when they were safely away from the Retribution did she allow herself to relax slightly. "Did you see him?" Zara whispered. "Is he all right?" "He's alive," Isabella replied quietly. "Scared, but unharmed. And now I know exactly where he is and how to get to him." Back at their temporary headquarters, a warehouse owned by their merchant ally Isabella gathered her crew and outlined the next phase of the plan. Tonight, Captain Blackthorn will be dining at the Merchant's Inn. He'll bring some of his officers with him, which means the Retribution will be less heavily guarded than usual. That's when we strike. "How do we get aboard?" Miguel asked. Isabella smiled. "The same way I did today. We don't sneak aboard like pirates. We arrive like we belong there. Some of you will dress as British sailors. Others will pose as merchants delivering supplies. We'll have multiple teams approaching from different directions, at different times. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, we'll have Antoine and the others free. And then? Zara asked. Then we run like hell, Isabella said bluntly. We'll have boats waiting at multiple points around the harbor. We split up, take different routes, and rendezvous at the swamp camp. Blackthorn will be furious, but by the time he realizes what's happened, we'll be long gone. The crew spent the afternoon preparing. Uniforms were acquired, some stolen, some purchased from corrupt suppliers. Weapons were concealed beneath clothing. Boats were positioned at strategic points around the harbor. Every detail was checked and rechecked. As evening approached, Isabella changed out of her elaborate gown and back into practical clothing, dark trousers, a loose shirt, and a long coat that concealed her weapons. She tied her hair back and smudged dirt on her face to obscure her features. "Ready?" Miguel asked. Isabella nodded. "Let's bring our people home." The rescue operation began at precisely 9 o'clock, when Captain Blackthorn would be well into his dinner at the Merchant's Inn. The first team dressed as British sailors approached the Retribution in a small boat, calling out that they had dispatches from the harbor master. The guards on deck, seeing what appeared to be fellow sailors, allowed them to come aboard. Within moments, the sailors had overpowered the guards, binding and gagging them before they could raise an alarm. The second team, posing as merchants delivering rum and supplies, arrived minutes later. They too were allowed aboard, and they too quickly subdued the sailors they encountered. Isabella came with the third team, moving swiftly and silently through the ship. She had memorized the layout during her tour, and she navigated the corridors with confidence. Behind her, Miguel and 4 others followed, weapons drawn. They encountered 2 guards outside the brig. Isabella didn't hesitate. She struck fast and hard, her knife finding the vulnerable points in their defenses. The guards fell without making a sound. Miguel grabbed the keys from one of the fallen guards and unlocked the brig door. Inside, Antoine and his companions looked up in shock. "Isabella?" Antoine whispered. "Did you think I'd leave you here?" Isabella replied, already working on his shackles with a lockpick. "Come on, we don't have much time." Within minutes, all 3 prisoners were free. Isabella handed them weapons and led them back through the ship. So far, the operation had gone perfectly. They had encountered minimal resistance, and no alarm had been raised. But as they emerged onto the main deck, their luck ran out. A British officer, one who had apparently returned early from dinner, stood near the gangway, staring at the scene before him in shock. For a moment, everyone froze. Then the officer opened his mouth to shout. Isabella's knife flew through the air, striking him in the shoulder. He cried out in pain, and suddenly the deck erupted into chaos. Sailors poured up from below, and the alarm bell began to ring. "Go!" Isabella shouted. "Get to the boats!" Her crew fought their way to the railing, engaging the British sailors in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Isabella found herself facing 3 opponents at once, her cutlass flashing in the lamplight. She fought with the skill born of years of practice, her movements fluid and deadly. Antoine fought beside her, protecting her back as they slowly made their way toward the railing. "Just like old times," he shouted over the din of battle. "We never did anything like this!" Isabella shot back, parrying a thrust and countering with a slash that sent her opponents stumbling backward. Miguel had reached the railing and was helping crew members over the side into the waiting boats. "Captain, we need to go now." Isabella glanced around. Most of her crew had made it over the side. Only she, Antoine, and a handful of others remained on deck, still fighting off the British sailors. "Fall back," she ordered. "Everyone to the boats." They fought their way to the railing, covering each other as they climbed over. Isabella was the last to go, pausing at the top of the railing to look back at the chaos on deck. And there, emerging from below, was Captain Blackthorn. He must have received word of the attack and rushed back from dinner. His face was purple with rage, and his eyes locked onto Isabella. You! He roared. La Capitana! Isabella gave him a mocking salute. Captain Blackthorne, thank you for your hospitality. I'm afraid we must be going now. Then she dropped over the side, landing in the boat below. Row, she commanded. Row like your lives depend on it. The boats pulled away from the Retribution just as the British sailors began firing muskets from the deck. Bullets splashed into the water around them, but in the darkness and confusion, the aim was poor. Within minutes, they had reached the shadows of the harbor, where other boats waited to help them disperse. Isabella's boat made it to a small dock on the outskirts of Mobile. They abandoned the boat and melted into the night, taking different routes back to the swamp camp. Isabella, Antoine, Zara, and Miguel traveled together, moving quickly through the darkness. Only when they were deep in the swamp, with the lights of Mobile far behind them, did Isabella allow herself to stop and catch her breath. She turned to Antoine and pulled him into a fierce embrace. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," she said, her voice shaking. Antoine hugged her back just as tightly. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I should have been more careful." "You're alive," she said. "That's all that matters." They made it back to camp just before dawn. The crew that had remained behind cheered when they saw the rescue party return safely. There were embraces, tears of relief, and celebrations that lasted well into the morning. But Isabella knew this was only a temporary victory. Blackthorne would be more determined than ever to capture her now. She had humiliated him, rescued his prisoners right from under his nose. He would not rest until he had his revenge. The final confrontation was coming, and Isabella needed to be ready. Chapter 14. The Final Battle. Captain Blackthorne's rage was legendary. The story of how La Capitana had walked onto his ship, disguised as a Spanish lady, toured the vessel, and then returned that very night to rescue her captured crew members spread through every port and tavern along the Gulf Coast. Blackthorne became a laughingstock, and his fury knew no bounds. He requested and received reinforcements from the British Naval Command. 2 additional warships, the Vengeance and the Relentless, joined the Retribution in Mobile Bay. Blackthorne's orders were clear. Find La Capitana and destroy her, no matter the cost. Isabella learned of this development through her network of informants. 3 warships against her small sloop and scattered crew. The odds were impossible. "We should run," Miguel said during a council meeting in the swamp camp. "Head west, maybe to Texas. Start over somewhere Blackthorne can't reach us." "He'll follow," Isabella replied. "You know he will. This has become personal for him. He won't stop until one of us is dead." "Then what do you suggest?" Antoine asked. "We can't fight 3 warships with what we have." Isabella had been thinking about this problem for days, and she had come to a conclusion. "We can't fight them with what we have," she agreed. "So we need to get something better." She unrolled a map on the makeshift table. "There's a Spanish merchant ship, the Santa Rosa, currently anchored near Pensacola. She's a large vessel, well-armed, with 40 guns. Her captain is a man named Rodrigo Salazar, and he's known for his cruelty to his crew. I've heard rumors that his men are on the verge of mutiny." "You want to steal a Spanish warship?" Zara asked, her eyebrows raised. "Not steal," Isabella corrected. "Liberate. We help the crew mutiny. They join us, and we have a ship that can stand against Blackthorne's fleet." It was a bold plan, perhaps even mad. But the crew had learned to trust Isabella's instincts, and after some discussion, they agreed to try. The operation took 2 weeks to plan and execute. Isabella sent agents to Pensacola to make contact with the disgruntled crew members of the Santa Rosa. She learned that Captain Salazar was indeed a tyrant, withholding pay, administering brutal punishments, and treating his men like slaves. The crew was ready to rebel, they just needed someone to lead them. Isabella provided that leadership. On a moonless night, she and a small team infiltrated the Santa Rosa. They met with the mutineers, and together they moved through the ship, quietly subduing the officers loyal to Salazar. By dawn, the ship was theirs. Captain Salazar himself was locked in his own brig, screaming threats and curses. Isabella visited him once, looking at him through the bars. "You brought this on yourself," she told him. "Treat men like animals, and eventually they'll turn on you. You should have learned that lesson long ago." "You're a pirate and a thief," Salazar spat. "The Spanish crown will hunt you down for this." "Perhaps," Isabella said calmly. "But right now I have more immediate concerns. Enjoy your accommodations, Captain. They're the same ones you forced your crew to endure." With the Santa Rosa, which Isabella renamed the Libertad under her command, she now had a fighting chance against Blackthorn. The ship was larger and better armed than anything she had commanded before. Combined with her tactical brilliance and the loyalty of her crew, she might actually survive the coming battle. But she didn't want to just survive. She wanted to end this, once and for all. Isabella sent a message to Captain Blackthorn, delivered by a neutral merchant captain. The message was simple. "Captain Blackthorn, you have hunted me long enough. Let us end this honorably, in open combat. I will meet you at the coordinates below, 3 days hence, at noon. Come alone or bring your entire fleet, it matters not. One way or another, this ends." "La Capitana." Blackthorn's response came the next day. "La Capitana, I accept your challenge. I will bring all 3 ships, and I will show no mercy. You have humiliated me for the last time. Prepare to meet your end. Captain Blackthorn." The coordinates Isabella had chosen were in open water, far from any coast, where there would be no interference and no escape. It would be a pure test of skill, strategy, and courage. As the appointed day approached, Isabella prepared her crew. She drilled them relentlessly on gunnery, on sail handling, on damage control. She studied the capabilities of Blackthorn's ships, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. And she made peace with the possibility that she might not survive the coming battle. The night before the confrontation, she sat with Zara, Antoine, and Miguel around a small fire on the deck of the Libertad. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Isabella said, "I want you all to know that you've been more than crew to me. You've been family. You gave me a home when I had none, purpose when I was lost, and love when I thought I was unworthy of it." "Don't talk like that," Antoine said roughly. "We're going to win tomorrow. You're the best captain on the Gulf, and Blackthorn is going to learn that the hard way." "Maybe," Isabella said. "But if things go wrong, if I fall, I need you to promise me something. Don't throw your lives away trying to avenge me. Take the ship, take the crew, and sail away. Live your lives. Be happy. That's what I want." "We're not going to lose you," Zara said firmly. "You've survived everything life has thrown at you, child. You'll survive this too." Isabella smiled, drawing strength from their faith in her. "Then let's make sure we give Blackthorn a fight he'll never forget." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a steady wind from the east. Perfect sailing weather, perfect fighting weather. The Libertad reached the appointed coordinates at 11:30. Isabella stood at the helm, her spyglass trained on the horizon. Right on schedule, 3 ships appeared, the Retribution, the Vengeance, and the Relentless, sailing in formation. "Battle stations," Isabella called. "Gun crews to your positions. Prepare to engage." The crew moved with practiced efficiency, each person knowing their role. The gun ports opened, and the cannons were run out. Powder and shot were brought up from the magazine. The ship's surgeon set up his station below decks, ready to treat the wounded. Isabella studied the approaching ships through her spyglass. Blackthorn was on the Retribution, in the center of the formation. The other 2 ships flanked him, ready to converge on the Libertad from multiple angles. "He's planning to surround us," Miguel observed. "Catch us in a crossfire." "I know," Isabella said, "which is why we're not going to be where he expects us to be." She had spent days planning her strategy, and now it was time to execute it. "Hard to starboard," she commanded. "Full sail. We're going to hit them before they can complete their formation." The Libertad turned sharply, her sails filling with wind. Instead of waiting for Blackthorn's ships to surround her, Isabella was charging directly at them, aiming for the gap between the Retribution and the Vengeance. "She's mad," someone on the British ships must have said, because Isabella could see the confusion in their movements. They had expected her to try to flee or to maneuver defensively. They hadn't expected her to attack. "Steady," Isabella called to her crew. "Wait for my command." The distance closed rapidly. 500 yards. 400. 300. "Fire!" Isabella shouted. The Libertad's starboard guns roared, sending a devastating broadside into the Vengeance. The British ship shuddered under the impact, her rigging torn and her hull splintered. Before the British could respond, Isabella had already ordered the helm hard to port. "Reload! Port guns! Prepare to fire!" The Libertad swung around, presenting her port side to the Retribution. Blackthorn's flagship fired first, but Isabella had timed her maneuver perfectly. Most of the British shots passed harmlessly through the space where the Libertad had been moments before. "Fire!" Isabella commanded again. The port guns thundered, and this time, the Retribution took the full force of the broadside. Isabella saw the British ship's mainmast crack and topple, crashing down onto the deck in a tangle of rigging and canvas. "Reload! Come about! Prepare to engage the Relentless!" The battle became a deadly dance, with Isabella using the Libertad's superior maneuverability to stay one step ahead of the British ships. She would strike, then move, before they could bring their guns to bear. She used the wind, the waves, and her intimate knowledge of sailing to maximum advantage. But the British had numbers on their side, and gradually they began to coordinate their attacks. The Libertad took hits cannonballs smashing through her hull, tearing through her rigging, killing and wounding her crew. The deck became slick with blood, and the air filled with smoke and the screams of the wounded. Isabella fought like a woman possessed, directing the battle while also engaging in hand-to-hand combat when British sailors tried to board. Her cutlass flashed in the sunlight, and more than one British sailor fell before her blade. Antoine commanded the gun crews, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. Miguel coordinated the damage control teams, rushing from one crisis to another. Zara worked with the surgeon below decks, treating the wounded and dying. The battle raged for hours. Ships circled each other, firing broadsides, attempting to board, breaking apart, and reforming. The sea around them was littered with debris, broken masts, torn sails, bodies floating in the water. And then, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Isabella saw her opportunity. The Retribution and the Vengeance had become entangled, their rigging fouled together. They were trying to separate, but in their current state, they were vulnerable. "There!" Isabella shouted, pointing. "Full sail! We're gonna rake them!" The Libertad surged forward, positioning herself at the stern of the two entangled ships. This was the most vulnerable position on any vessel. The stern offered little protection, and a broadside fired from this angle would travel the entire length of the ship, causing maximum damage. "All guns," Isabella commanded. "Fire as you bear." The Libertad's guns fired in sequence, each cannonball smashing through the stern windows of the Retribution and traveling the length of the ship. The devastation was catastrophic. Isabella could hear the screams even over the roar of the cannons. The Vengeance, still entangled with the Retribution, tried to bring her guns to bear, but she was at the wrong angle. The Relentless, seeing the destruction of her sister ships, began to pull away. "They're running!" Antoine shouted. "The Relentless is breaking off." Isabella watched through her spyglass as the Relentless turned and fled, her captain apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. That left only the Retribution and the Vengeance, both badly damaged and still entangled. "Prepare to board," Isabella commanded. "We're ending this now." The Libertad pulled alongside the Retribution, and Isabella's crew swarmed across, engaging the British sailors in fierce combat. Isabella led the charge, her cutlass in one hand and a pistol in the other. She fought her way across the deck, looking for Blackthorn. She found him near the helm, surrounded by his remaining officers. He was wounded, blood streamed from a cut on his forehead, but he still fought with desperate fury. "Blackthorn!" Isabella shouted. It's over. Surrender. Never, he roared back. I'll see you in hell first. He charged at her, his sword raised. Isabella met his attack, their blades clashing with a shower of sparks. They fought across the blood-slicked deck, two captains locked in mortal combat. Blackthorn was strong and skilled, but Isabella was faster and more agile. She parried his strikes, looking for an opening. And then she saw it he overextended on a thrust, leaving himself vulnerable. Isabella's cutlass flashed, knocking his sword from his hand. Before he could recover, she had her blade at his throat. Yield, she said, breathing hard. It's over, Blackthorn. You've lost. Around them, the fighting was dying down. The British sailors, seeing their captain defeated, were throwing down their weapons and surrendering. The vengeance had struck her colors, signaling her surrender. Blackthorn stared at Isabella, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Kill me, he said. I won't live with this shame. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the pain he had caused, all the lives he had destroyed in his obsessive hunt for her. She thought about Antoine, nearly hanged because of this man. She thought about her crew, the men and women who had died today in this battle. And then she lowered her sword. No, she said. I won't kill you, Blackthorn. I'm going to do something worse. I'm going to let you live. You'll return to your superiors and explain how you lost 3 ships to a single pirate captain. You'll live with the knowledge that you were beaten by a woman, that all your pride and all your ships weren't enough to defeat La Capitana. That is my revenge. She turned to her crew. Take the British officers into custody. Treat the wounded, both ours and theirs. And someone signal the Relentless, tell them if they return, we'll sink them. But if they leave now and never come back, we'll let them go. As her crew moved to carry out her orders, Isabella walked to the railing and looked out at the sea. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and red. 3 ships floated nearby the Libertad, battered but victorious. The Retribution, her masts broken and her hull holed. And the Vengeance, listing badly but still afloat. It was over. She had won. Zara came to stand beside her. You showed him mercy, she said. That took courage. Mercy is not weakness, Isabella replied, echoing Zara's words from weeks before. And I'm tired of killing. I'm tired of fighting. I want. She paused, searching for the words. I want something more. Then take it, Zara said simply. You've earned it, child. You've earned peace. In the weeks that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the Gulf Coast and beyond. The story of how La Capitana had defeated 3 British warships became legend. But more than that, the story of how she had spared Captain Blackthorn's life, showing mercy when she could have taken revenge, impressed even her enemies. The Spanish authorities, who had placed a bounty on her head, quietly withdrew it. They sent an unofficial message through intermediaries. La Capitana had shown honor in victory, and they would not pursue her further, provided she ceased her attacks on Spanish vessels. The British, humiliated by the defeat, recalled Captain Blackthorn and quietly reassigned him to a desk position in London. They too sent word that they would not seek further conflict with La Capitana, provided she stayed away from British shipping. Isabella had achieved something remarkable. She had won not just a battle, but a kind of peace. She was still a pirate, still an outlaw, but she was no longer actively hunted. She had earned a measure of respect, even from her enemies. It was time to decide what to do with that hard-won peace. Chapter 15. New Horizons. The rebuilding of Boyuo La Batre began in the spring of 1815. Isabella returned to the settlement of her birth with a fortune in gold and silver, the spoils of years of piracy. But she didn't come to flaunt her wealth, she came to give back. The hurricane that had destroyed the settlement years before had left only ruins and memories. The few survivors who had remained had rebuilt what they could, but it was a shadow of what it had once been. Isabella changed that. She hired carpenters, masons, and laborers. She purchased lumber, tools, and supplies. And slowly, methodically, she rebuilt the settlement. New houses rose where old ones had fallen. A new dock stretched into the bay, sturdy and well-constructed. A community center was built, with a school on the ground floor and a meeting hall above. But Isabella didn't just rebuild buildings, she rebuilt lives. She established a fishing cooperative, providing boats and equipment to families who had lost everything. She set up a fund to help widows and orphans. She created jobs, opportunities, hope. The people of Boyuo La Batre didn't know that their benefactor was the notorious pirate La Capitana. They knew her as Isabella Reyes, a wealthy woman who had made her fortune in trade and had chosen to invest it in her hometown. Only a few trusted individuals knew the truth. Isabella threw herself into the work, finding a satisfaction in building that she had never found in raiding. She worked alongside the carpenters, her hands blistered and her back aching. She taught in the school, sharing her knowledge of navigation, mathematics, and languages. She sat with the elderly, listening to their stories and their wisdom. And slowly, she began to heal. The hardness that years of piracy had created began to soften. The constant vigilance, the expectation of betrayal, the readiness for violence, all of it began to fade, replaced by something gentler. Zara worked beside her, managing the cooperative and organizing the community. Antoine, who had been given command of the Libertad, which he renamed the Seahawk, continued to sail, but now he focused on legitimate trade rather than piracy. He transported goods between ports, carried passengers, and occasionally helped other ships in distress. He was becoming the kind of captain Isabella had once dreamed of being respected, honorable, free. Miguel retired from the sea entirely, settling in Boyuo La Batre and opening a tavern. It quickly became the social center of the community, a place where fishermen and merchants gathered to share stories and news. The crew of the Libertad, those who had survived the battle with Blackthorn, scattered to various pursuits. Some joined Antoine on the Seahawk. Others settled in Boyuo La Batre or nearby communities, using their share of the treasure to start new lives. A few continued in piracy, but they were the minority. Most, like Isabella, were ready for something different. It was in the autumn of that year that Jacques Beaumont returned from the north. Isabella was working on the dock, inspecting the day's catch with the fishermen, when she heard a familiar voice call her name. She turned, and there he was, older, more weathered, but unmistakably Jacques. His canoe was loaded with furs, and he wore the buckskin clothing of a frontiersman. But his eyes, when they met hers, held the same warmth and intelligence she remembered. "Jacques," she breathed, and then she was running, propriety forgotten, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, holding her tight, and for a long moment they simply stood there, two people who had found each other again, against all odds. "I heard stories," Jacques said when they finally pulled apart. Stories of a great battle, of La Capitana defeating 3 British warships. Stories of a pirate queen who showed mercy to her enemies. "I knew it had to be you." "I'm not a pirate queen anymore," Isabella said. "I'm just Isabella, trying to build something good, something lasting." Jacques looked around at the bustling settlement, at the new buildings and the busy dock, at the children playing in the street. "You've done more than build, Isabella. You've created a community, a home. I'm proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without the people who believed in me," Isabella said. "Zara, Antoine, Miguel, and..." She paused, looking up at him. "And you? You showed me that there was more to life than revenge and survival. You showed me that I could be more than what my father thought I was." "Your father was a fool," Jacques said bluntly. "He couldn't see the treasure he had in you, but I can. I've always been able to see it." They walked along the dock, talking, catching up on the months they had been apart. Jacques told her about his time in the north, about the trappers and traders he had met, about the vast wilderness that stretched beyond the frontier. Isabella told him about the battle with Blackthorn, about her decision to spare his life, about the peace she had found in rebuilding Boyuo La Batre. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jacques stopped walking and turned to face her. "Isabella," he said, his voice serious, "I've spent the last year traveling, trading, exploring. I've seen mountains and rivers, forests and plains. I've met interesting people and had adventures. But through it all, there was something missing. Someone missing." Isabella's heart began to beat faster. "Jacques!" "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since the first time I saw you in that tavern in Mobile. Fierce and beautiful and utterly unlike anyone I'd ever met. I love your courage, your intelligence, your compassion. I love the way you fight for what you believe in, the way you protect the people you care about. I love everything about you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold ring. "I'm not a wealthy man," Jacques continued. "I can't offer you riches or a grand estate, but I can offer you my heart, my loyalty, and my love, for as long as I live. Isabella Reyes, will you marry me?" Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. For so long, she had believed that love was not meant for someone like her. She had been the unwanted daughter, the pirate captain, the outlaw. She had thought that her life would always be defined by struggle and survival. But here was Jacques, offering her something she had never dared to hope for: a future, a partnership, a love that was freely given and joyfully received. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Jacques, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her, and Isabella felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. The wedding took place 2 months later, in the new community center in Boyuo La Batre. It was a simple ceremony, but it was attended by everyone who mattered: to Isabella, her crew, her friends, the people of the settlement who had come to respect and admire her. Zara stood beside Isabella as her matron of honor, tears of joy streaming down her face. Antoine walked Isabella down the aisle, his chest puffed with pride. Miguel provided the music, playing a fiddle with surprising skill. And when the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, a voice called out from the back of the hall, "I object to not being invited." Everyone turned to see Jean Lafitte standing in the doorway, dressed in his finest clothes and grinning broadly. Isabella laughed, delighted by his appearance. "Jean Lafitte, what are you doing here?" "I heard that La Capitana was getting married," Lafitte said, walking down the aisle. "I couldn't miss such an occasion. Besides, I brought a gift." He gestured to 2 men standing behind him, who carried a large wooden chest. They set it down at the front of the hall and opened it, revealing a treasure trove of fine goods: silk, spices, jewelry, and gold. "A wedding gift," Lafitte said with a bow. "From one captain to another. May your marriage be as successful as your career as a pirate." Isabella embraced him, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Jean. Your friendship means more to me than any treasure." "Friendship?" Lafitte repeated, his eyes twinkling. "Yes, I suppose we are friends, aren't we? Strange how life works out. I came to the Gulf Coast expecting to be the most notorious pirate in these waters, and instead I found myself constantly upstaged by a woman half my age. It's been humbling." "You're still the most notorious pirate in these waters," Isabella assured him. "I've retired, remember?" "Retired?" Lafitte said thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose you have. Well, perhaps I should consider retirement as well. I'm getting too old for this life." "You'll never retire," Isabella said with a smile. "You love it too much." "Perhaps you're right," Lafitte admitted, "but I can still appreciate what you've built here. You've found something that most of us never find: peace, purpose, and love. Hold on to it, Isabella. It's more valuable than all the treasure in the Caribbean." The ceremony continued, and when the minister pronounced Isabella and Jacques husband and wife, the hall erupted in cheers. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and joy. It was a celebration not just of a marriage, but of new beginnings, of hope, of the possibility of redemption and change. As the evening wore on, Isabella found herself standing outside, looking up at the stars. Jacques came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Isabella replied. "I keep thinking about that girl I used to be, the one who was told she was worthless, who was resented and rejected. If she could see me now, she would be proud," Jacques said firmly. "You've become everything you dreamed of and more. You've been a captain, a leader, a hero to many. And now you're building something even more important, a life, a family, a legacy that will last long after the stories of La Capitana have faded." Isabella leaned against him, drawing comfort from his presence. "I want children," she said suddenly. "I want to raise them here. In this place I've helped rebuild. I want to teach them to be strong and kind, to fight for what's right, to never let anyone tell them they can't achieve their dreams." "Then that's what we'll do," Jacques said. "We'll build a family, a home, a future, together." They stood there for a long time, watching the stars and listening to the sounds of celebration from inside. And Isabella felt, for the first time in her life, truly at peace. Epilogue. 5 years later, Isabella sat on the porch of her home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The house was modest but comfortable, built on a small hill overlooking Boyuo La Batre and the bay beyond. From here, she could see the entire settlement, the bustling dock, the neat rows of houses, the community center, the fishing boats returning with their daily catch. Beside her, Jacques sat in a rocking chair, whittling a small wooden toy. And playing in the yard before them was their daughter, Marie, a bright-eyed 4-year-old with her mother's dark hair and her father's easy smile. "Mama, look," Marie called, holding up a shell she had found. "It's beautiful." "It is, sweetheart," Isabella agreed. "Bring it here, and I'll tell you about the creature that once lived in it." Marie ran up the porch steps, and Isabella pulled her onto her lap, explaining about mollusks and tides and the mysteries of the sea. Marie listened with rapt attention, her curiosity insatiable. Isabella saw so much of herself in her daughter, the intelligence, the determination, the refusal to accept limitations. But Marie was growing up in a different world than Isabella had known. She was loved, encouraged, supported. She would never know what it was like to be resented or rejected. She would grow up believing that she could be anything she wanted to be. In the bay, the Seahawk rode at anchor, her sails furled. Antoine had returned from a trading voyage to Havana, and he would be joining them for dinner tonight. He had become a successful merchant captain, respected throughout the Gulf. He had even found love a spirited woman named Carmen, who sailed with him as his first mate. Zara lived in a small cottage nearby, still helping to manage the fishing cooperative. She was getting older now, her hair completely gray, but her spirit remained strong. She spent her days teaching the children of Boyuo La Batre, passing on her wisdom and her stories. Miguel's tavern had become famous throughout the region, known for its good food, strong drink, and the colorful tales told by its proprietor. He had married a local woman and had 3 children of his own. The crew of the Libertad, those who had survived, had scattered to the winds, but they stayed in touch. Letters arrived regularly, bringing news of their adventures and their lives. Some had found peace, as Isabella had. Others continued to sail the seas, seeking fortune and adventure. But all of them remembered their time with La Capitana, and all of them carried a piece of that experience with them. As for Jean Lafitte, he had indeed continued his career as a pirate and privateer. But he had also become a friend, visiting Boyuo La Batre occasionally to share stories and gifts. He had sent a beautiful silver rattle when Marie was born, along with a note that read, "For the daughter of La Capitana, may she inherit her mother's courage and her father's wisdom." Isabella's thoughts were interrupted by Jacques' voice. "What are you thinking about?" She smiled. "Everything. The journey that brought me here, the people who helped me along the way. How different my life is now from what I once imagined. Do you miss it?" Jacques asked. The adventure? The freedom of the sea? Isabella considered this. Sometimes, she admitted. There are moments when I hear the wind in the rigging or smell the salt air, and I remember what it was like to stand at the helm of a ship, to feel the power of the ocean beneath me. But then I look at Marie, at this community we've built, at the life we have together, and I know I made the right choice. You can have both, you know, Jacques said. We could take Marie on a voyage sometime. Show her the world beyond Boyuo La Batre. Maybe, Isabella said, when she's older. For now, I'm content to be here, to watch her grow, to build something lasting. Marie had fallen asleep in Isabella's arms, exhausted from her day of play. Isabella carried her inside and tucked her into bed, brushing a kiss across her forehead. Dream big, little one, she whispered. Dream of ships and stars, of adventures and possibilities, and know that whatever you dream, you can achieve it. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. I hope you liked the story of Isabella the Pirate. For more stories and audiobooks, go to my Facebook page, Sylvester Sko Fourroux, and join my pages. Also, you can get all my book and novels by Googling books by Sylvester Sko Fourroux, and it will take you to Amazon and other bookstores.